Addiction is one of humanity's oldest struggles, a force that enslaves body, mind, and spirit. It grips millions in a cycle of despair, leaving them powerless to break free. Treatments abound, yet so often the deeper wounds remain untouched. In The Impossible Prize, a theology of addiction, we look deeper, beyond the physical and psychological, to the spiritual battle at addiction's core. Drawn on the profound insights of the 16th century theologian Martin Luther, this book uncovers addiction as a false god, a counterfeit refuge sought amidst life's pain and suffering. In the cross, we find the paradox of recovery. That suffering opens the door to hope and weakness gives way to the transformative power of God's will. Through the teachings of Martin Luther, The Impossible Prize unveils how the battle with addiction can become a path of freedom, purpose, and redemption. Discover how even the depths of addiction, God's grace offers life, and life abundant.
Does it go away? I don't know what happens next.
No, it stays. It never
goes away.
leaves.
Perfect.
There we go.
Nice.
Yeah. Script by me.
Nicely done.
Art design by me. Yeah, we had fun with that.
Full execution, a team.
A team. That's right. No, I said we were talking, and I was talking with the design team at 1517, and I said they were talking about like what do you want for narration? I'm like, I want Seamus Heaney to do it. And like, who's that? I'm like, well, go on YouTube, listen to Seamus Heaney. He's an Irish poet, and then I want you to find somebody who sounds like Seamus Heaney who smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day for most of his life, because the book itself has to. Is about.
It has to sound like somebody who
has lived,
knows something about addiction.
Yeah. So that was key when they're like, we can do that. I'm like, if you can do that, then no matter what I write, it's going to sound brilliant. So,
if you could have gotten like Tom Waits or something though.
Oh, well, yeah. I had some
Coffee and
choices, but
Cigarettes?
they might have
Was
been a little too expensive.
Was that
Like
the movie?
Brendan Gleeson or somebody.
Oh yeah, there's another one. It just has that. Yeah, like you said, has lived.
Yes.
Beautiful.
So yeah, that comes out March 6th. The book Impossible Prize. I hope it sells tons of copies. I won't see royalties for a while, but
you didn't do it for the royalties.
No, I did it to help people. So hopefully people buy big stacks of the books for their sobriety groups and for their church groups. And I just was reading Pastor Stiegmeyer on Facebook this morning.
I saw that. I was gonna post a link to your.
You should. I didn't want to do it myself because that would be weird. But
well, I thought, well, I would wait till it comes out and he gets a chance to read it.
Other than one other book that I know of by John Zoll, which is a theological commentary on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Oh yeah, that's right. He did do that.
There are no other theological resources, especially for Lutherans.
You want to hear something funny? This is not a judgment against anyone, but when you go to Impossible Prize, a Theology of Addiction on Amazon, pre-order price guarantee, very nice, by Donovan Riley and Chad Bird.
I can't escape him.
Can't escape Chad. Contributor.
That's right. He wrote the foreword.
He wrote the foreword. Yeah.
Yes, he's extremely kind and a very, very good foreword.
Oh, he does good forewords. This is true.
That's what I said to Steve, our friend who's kind of in charge of the publishing side of our 1517 venture. I said, if you just want me to write forewords, I'm happy to do it. It's a good gig. It pays well, and 250 words, you're in, you're out. Get you books.
Yeah, and generally complimentary.
Well, yeah.
It's kind of the goal.
Yes, it is the goal. But
it's the idea is like, oh, keep reading. Please.
If anyone works in publishing who listens to this and you want a full-time forward writer, I would gladly be available to do that.
Amazon says March 11th.
Oh, really? Well, March 6th, March 11th, whatever.
Well, it's whenever they get them, I think.
Fair.
When they start shipping.
So yeah, pre-order.
Kindle will be $7. Paperback $15. So that's very, very affordable.
I don't know if I've talked about it here, but every time I turn in a manuscript, the question is always, is this it? Is this everything?
You're right, brief.
And I said, I've spent 17 years as a pastor, like paring down everything that I write so that it's just the bare essence of the thing, preaching, teaching, everything, just using an economy of words. And so when I write anything, when my brain goes, we're done. Like, we're just done. And as I said with Crucifying Religion also, I want people to be able to look at the physical book and say, I can read that. That'll be easy to read in the weekend.
It is important.
I think so, because do you need 2, 3, 4, 500 pages to say what you need to say on a certain topic? Maybe for some people, that's true.
Yeah. You know
I'm
what my
not going to
favorite
complain
is?
about Lord of the Rings being too long.
It's behind me here.
Albrecht Peters' commentary on the catechisms.
Yeah, no, I like that one. I was looking for my commentary of Philemon. That's 800 pages.
There you go.
It's a one-page book.
Right. Does it need to be 800 pages? No.
Well, if
But
you
the
want a full
author,
treatise on biblical slavery,
sure.
that's it.
Yeah.
But that's not Philemon exactly, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. I don't get paid by the word or the page. So economy of words. And also, when you write something on this topic as an example, that you're writing for addicts, recovering addicts, family or friends, or people who know an addict and want to understand this side of the street in regards to addiction, I don't want you to feel, one, intimidated that you have to invest $30, $40, $50 in a book that's going to take you a month to finish, because I do want it to be used by small groups in particular.
Yeah.
And you can go through a chapter a week, or I think, do I divide this into subheadings inside the chapters? I do.
Yeah, part 1, part
Yeah,
2.
so each chapter then has subheadings within the chapter. So you can read one part of a chapter every time you meet as a group and just ruminate on that. In fact, the original manuscript had questions at the end of the chapters. And then I decided
you dropped those?
Yeah, I decided that I didn't want to, lead with questions. I wanted people to be able to read to it.
You should just
Publish a study guide.
Yeah, just have it as a link as a study guide.
Yeah, I could do that for sure. I have the manuscript.
Or just put it, just see if they'll just do it as a post.
Yeah. Now, that being said, I'm speaking at 2 conferences this year, one in California, one in Illinois in a couple of weeks, on this book on addiction. But the time that I'm given to speak is lengthy. And so I've actually expanded every chapter of the book so that it is.
Oh, so you have more time.
Yeah, I have like 2 hours per session. Like in Illinois, I have 4 sessions.
But I can't imagine you could take one heading and talk an hour on one heading.
I can talk about anything all day, you know that. But
right, yeah.
But it's like, okay, I have 2 hours to speak on a chapter that takes 45 minutes to read. So right now I'm up to probably 200 or 300 pages.
But you don't expect them to have read it ahead of time.
No. So you have to provide the groundwork. You have to clear the rocks. You have to furrow it. You have to plant it. You have to water it for them, because they don't have the context yet because the book's not out.
Well, I started doing this is recording a podcast version of articles I write for the congregation.
Nice.
And one of the things that I found, I got this idea from another podcast, not church related, is that sometimes you need a little introduction, say, to get people into it.
Yeah.
But a lot of times you're just like, okay, now that we read it, here's some other things, here's some fruits of that.
Idea.
Yeah. And you can just, sometimes it's as lengthy, the commentary is, as the article itself.
Yeah. So do you publish that then for your congregation on your website?
Yeah, I just put it with the article. Yeah.
Nice.
Just add it to the article. I've just started doing that this last week. Because I think some people, well, one, inflection is not something you get from reading.
True. Right.
And
a lot of people don't read.
And a lot of people don't read. Yeah, that's the other thing. So that really, maybe it helps. I don't know. We'll see if anybody.
No, I have friends who say, can you record this for me so I can listen to it in the car, for example?
I've had Siri read things to me, but
it's not as, no,
it's not the same.
So that being said, today on the show, episode number, whatever this is,
382.
Again, this is shameless self-promotion of the book, The Impossible Prize, first chapter on addiction.
Yeah.
Luther's definition of a false god and addiction, because, well, why not?
Why not?
We can talk about the first commandment and
for free.
For free. There you go. So we will just dive right in. Link is in the show notes if you would like to pre-order the book. As I said, I think it's precisely 100 pages. I think I nailed it this time. 99 pages.
What was the last one? That was
plus
like
the intro, plus
88 or something like that.
Which one?
Crucifying Religion.
120, 118.
Was that 118?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then Wither Tongue Emails was around 120 also.
Oh, I guess it was.
No.
Okay.
It seems to be my end point.
That is consumable.
So chapter 1, Luther's definition of a false god and addiction. Alice Miller, breaking down the walls of silence, the liberating experience of facing painful truth, writes, what is addiction, really? It is a sign, a signal, a symptom of distress. It is a language that tells us about a plight that must be understood. So what is addiction? It's a sign. It's a signal. It's like your body manifesting symptoms of some sort of distress it's experiencing internally, right?
Yeah.
Runny nose, migraine, cough. These are symptoms of a head cold or flu or bronchitis.
I saw a quote from Aquinas.
Mhm.
I found it curious, but he said you can't really know anything without some sense.
Yeah.
He meant like tactile or
Yeah.
physical,
Right.
right?
Right.
And it's referring to ritual, I think. So you're saying, smells and bells,
Right. The earthly embodiment of heavenly
right?
truth.
So
Yeah.
so like if you want to teach the children about the wood of the cross, well, then
Mhm.
give them a wood cross, right? I
Right.
mean,
Yes.
and you're like, but that's too easy. Well, yes, but we're sensory people,
Right.
and
Take this fleece, put it on the ground.
so what you're saying is that yes, there's an emotional, spiritual issue,
Right.
but it's manifest with a physical symptom.
Correct. The symptoms will be noticeable.
Or in this case, the symptom is an action, right?
Behavior.
Behavior.
Yeah.
Well,
So part 1, what is addiction? Addiction is defined as a chronic, relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite the harmful consequences. It involves changes in the brain's reward, motivation, and memory circuits, which can lead to uncontrollable drug seeking and drug taking behavior. That is from the National Institute on Drug Abuse 2020.
I saw an ad, and this reminds me of the ad where it said, "Are you addicted to scrolling
Mhm.
and pornography?" And I
Mhm.
can't remember the third thing. If then take this supplement.
Mhm.
So they were saying
Right.
the addiction's not the problem. You just need to substitute the manifestation or the way that you're satisfying that craving with something else. That's
Well, the subtext is if these are changing your brain chemistry, take this medication and we'll change your brain
oh, it
chemistry.
specifically referred to dopamine.
Yeah, right.
So use this to get your dopamine hit instead of those.
Correct.
And
Yeah,
you're like, do I need all the dopamine?
right. Right.
And
If you're addicted to porn, here's a cigarette.
it's like, okay, it'll kill you in a different way.
Right.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah. And so
So,
what so from your definition,
mhm,
changing the brain's reward
correct.
system.
Mhm.
So that can be a positive or negative reward, or right?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, you think of happiness,
Hmm.
right? Someone hugs you or says, "Hey, I really appreciate you did what you did for me."
Yeah.
It's going to change your brain chemistry because it's affecting the dopamine, your endorphins, it's releasing oxytocin.
Hmm.
And
So,
that's why people get addicted to volunteering at a shelter or
oh,
fostering,
okay.
stray
For the good
animals.
feels.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. It's a kind of addiction. Now, we wouldn't usually describe it that way though.
But it is.
We would call it a passion, I think. Or
Well, think of what the word passion means, right? To suffer, to love, yes.
to lust, yeah.
It's multivariant.
Yeah.
So, according to the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, DSM 5, it's called, addiction is characterized by several key features, including an inability to control drug use, continued use despite negative consequences, and withdrawal symptoms when drug use is stopped. Think, for example, when you leave the house and you've forgotten your phone
Hmm.
and the sense of panic you experience. What is that? That is your brain,
It's a
literally
manifestation, yeah.
and physically, telling you your baby blanket is in the house.
I've thought about this in regards to driving.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if somebody posted or it was posted somewhere. Could you get to from point A to point B without the thing telling you how to get there?
Right.
And what is it doing to your brain if you
Correct.
continually let it tell you? So I
Right.
drove to Indiana last week. That's why we
Mhm.
didn't record. And I drove all the way there and all the way back without it telling me how to get there and to get back.
Mhm.
Because I've done it,
Yeah.
I don't know, 100 times.
Right.
So do I really need? I mean, I have it tell me if there's like a traffic thing coming up or something,
Right.
but do I need it to tell me like turn right here,
Mhm.
take that exit? Like, and this came out of actually a interview I was hearing with somebody talking about motorcycle riding
Mm.
and the way that motorcycle riding, you're fully engaged
Sure.
because not only because it's a manual transmission,
Right.
but because of the physical connection to the road and
Yeah.
need to respond to that and the gravitational pull of things, is that it's like riding a beast, but like a beast, you're fully engaged.
Yeah.
In a way that like an automatic car is now with driving directions or with some kind of auto driving functions too.
Right.
Like it keeps you in your lane and all of that. You're not as engaged. Well, that's
Right.
actually less safe.
Right.
So, is there some way that I'm trying to make the connection here that the drug use is a kind of control mechanism?
It's a conditioning of behaviors. For example, when I used to smoke, I was never without my cigarettes. There would be no driving unless I stopped at the store first to get a pack of cigarettes. You're never without cigarettes. You never leave your apartment without cigarettes. You would never consider that.
So like the phone,
Yeah.
is it a crutch or like what's the effect?
No, it's a drug.
It's just part of it. It just becomes part of the experience.
Your phone changes your brain chemistry.
It changes the way that you think, the way that you act, the way that you talk.
Well, think about it this way, right? A simple way to talk about addiction is when I wake up, I'm thinking about getting high. And then the rest of my day is orchestrated in such a way that I stay high, I get high, I procure drugs to maintain my high. And what do I do first thing? I don't, but what do most people do first thing in the morning? They reach over and grab their phone or their iPad and they open it and they immediately go and check their email or their texts. They go onto social media. Why do that immediately? Is there anything necessary on social media for you to see as soon as you wake up? And when you're talking with someone and all of a sudden they pull their phone out and just start texting, or they go on social media, or they're doing something on their phone while you're talking and they're talking to you. Why do we do that? It's a cigarette. It's literally a cigarette. But because that's what I would do if I were smoking. We'd be talking and I'd light up a cigarette. Or I'd wake up in the morning and I'd light up a cigarette. First thing. Last thing that I would do before bed, smoke a cigarette. If I go out to eat, I get done eating, what do? Smoke a cigarette. While I'm waiting for my meal to be brought to my table, I smoke a cigarette.
Maybe it's easier though with like something like drugs, cigarette, even coffee.
Hasn't been vilified yet.
Well, no, because you're literally putting chemical into you.
Right.
Whereas the idea that
the phone is
biochemical as well.
Yes.
Because we think of it purely technologically.
Right.
Of course, technology can change your biochemistry.
And has.
Yeah, it has.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the thing. The subtlety is that you drew out, which is smoking now, other than being anathematized.
Vaping as well now.
Vaping has been anathematized as well because, because big tobacco doesn't control the vape market. That's why.
Correct.
And because that's anathematized, but alcohol is not anathematized. Alcoholism is still socially acceptable. Smoking cigarettes is not, even though, as I said to my wife yesterday, or Tuesday when we went to her appointment and there was a woman who came outside to smoke, I'm like, I'm so proud of her for still smoking. I am.
It's come to that, yeah.
I'm like, finally someone who says to society, no, I'm not going to conform to your expectations because you think that I'm standing out here poisoning myself. Meanwhile, what's in your body? Like, what are you putting into your body? What are you addicted to? Right. And this is...
but coffee is good for you. I've read the articles.
It doesn't change your brain chemistry.
It doesn't change. Well, never mind. I forgot to have bring coffee to church yesterday.
So what happens though, now another layer below that, because people will ask, but isn't everybody addicted to something? Well, here's the problem that we have, and I address this in the book too, which is that culturally, we've turned bad habits, they used to be called vices, into a pathway to addiction to medical, pharmaceutical drugs, addiction to eating, addiction to sex, addiction to pornography, addiction to your phone, addiction. We live in a society that has been custom made to make us addicted.
And we do make qualitative differences.
It is downstream from corporatism, for example.
Sure.
Industrialization, because consume the product, digest the product, go back and get more product. Addiction is part and parcel of that economy.
Yeah, it's a genius economy. Like I tell people, it's like it's good to sell coffee because it's like I'm a drug dealer.
For people that don't know, in the late 90s, the food companies hired away the scientists from the tobacco companies.
Oh, that's been disputed.
and said explicitly in the letters that have been published,
I know.
we want you to do to our food what you did to cigarettes.
For this, is it Kaylee and Casey Means, right? Were the
Yeah.
two?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're the ones that brought that to the fore here recently.
Because again, for those who don't know, nicotine is not addictive. Tobacco leaves are not addictive. It's all of the chemicals they put into the cigarette that get you addicted to it.
You know what's a genius cure to kill the spike protein from COVID?
Yeah, I knew that. I just read
Nicotine.
This yeah, nicotine. That's
People
right.
were saying it. Like,
yeah,
how come the people that smoke aren't getting sick?
yeah.
It's like, because it
There you
kills
go.
it.
So that's a whole nother layer of conversation around addiction is, but we live in a society in the Western world that actually wants you addicted to a product. The question is just, as my daughter pointed out, she doesn't have to do meth like I
No,
would have
you
had
get
to do.
Adderall.
Right, exactly. You just go get Adderall. And you don't have to go buy heroin. You just go to the ER and say, "Oh, I have a tummy ache," and they'll give you Dilaudid.
Right.
So the drugs that I used to have to buy illegally under threat of going to jail for 5 to 7 years, you now just go to a doctor and say, "Ow," or "I can't concentrate." I just had this conversation with a 15-year-old student the other day. She said it. "I'm on Adderall." I go, "But don't you suffer from hyperactivity? And they're giving you amphetamines?"
Right.
I go, "So you're pouring fire onto a fire hoping that it extinguishes the fire?" And I go, if you just change your diet, everything will be fine.
Mm.
Right?
I wish somebody had said that to me, to, teenage me.
Yeah,
like,
right. But would we have listened?
No.
No.
No, well, because my entire environment
Mhm.
was supportive of
Right.
continuing the way I was, rather
That's what
than
I'm saying is
changing.
that's addiction. Addiction is creating an environment. It's downstream from the addiction. I'm going to surround myself with people and I'm going to be influenced by people who
Well,
perpetuate what I'm already habituated
I
towards.
mean, granted, this was a while ago now, but there was a stigma against food allergies.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
you couldn't even
Yeah.
say that like the people with the so-called gluten
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah.
It's like, unless it was celiac, then if you use a technical term, people are like,
Right.
okay,
Then
fine,
then it
that's an actual
legitimizes
thing,
it.
right? And dairy was that way too. It's like, you're not addicted. You're not.
And I know people with celiac disease. I'm not putting
No,
them
no, no,
down.
no.
It's legitimate. Yes.
But the point was, it's like, so then all the drugs being used
Correct.
to adapt
Yeah.
to being able to try to eat these things that I
Right.
really shouldn't have been eating.
And then you're told you can never go off this.
Yeah, and then, well, there is a reality to that.
And then you're physically addicted to it. And
What
then you're psychologically addicted because it helps.
and there's all sorts of terms for this, right? Like bounce
Right.
back, or
Yeah. Right.
this is true with like weight stuff too, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's just relapsing, rebranded.
So the focus of the
Mhm.
technical definition is drugs.
Correct. But drugs, broadly speaking, anything that alters your brain chemistry.
So that's why we can have like porn addiction.
Correct. Or people addiction. Anyone who's been in love knows what it means to be addicted to a human being.
We fall into it.
Yeah. That's why it's called falling in love.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
So additionally then, addiction can lead to physical and psychological dependence on drugs or other substances, which can cause individuals to prioritize drug use over other aspects of their lives, such as work, school, or relationships. This is the World Health Organization 2018.
Our friends. Oh, look
Our
at
friends at the WHO. So overall, addiction is a complex and multifaceted disorder that can have severe consequences for individuals, families, and communities. Therefore, a comprehensive approach to treatment and prevention that addresses the biological, psychological, and social factors contributing to its development and maintenance is required. And I laid this out at the beginning because, again, I wrote this journalistically on purpose because it's not about me. It's about the addict and the people
You might
who,
know something personally, but that's not the
right,
point.
but my addiction is going to be entirely unique to me
Of course.
versus if I had written this anecdotally, I would have lost most other addicts because it's my addiction that I'm writing about, not
Their pathway
ours.
was different.
Right.
Or
Right. I know people that grew up in nice homes, good, loving families, became addicts. I went a different route. Some people, they get drunk or high once and they go to meetings, they go to rehab, they get counseling.
Yeah. Or the
Others
gateways. The
have
gateways
to-
are different, right?
Yeah, others have to hit bottom 3, 4, 20 times.
Yeah.
Every story is different. So in this, the reason that I'm doing this is to say this is the kind of universally accepted explanation for addiction. Now, within this explanation, the biological, the psychological, the social, how do we address this theologically?
Right.
Because we need to. Yes, you have a support group, AA, home group, whatever, but do you have a congregation of saints? Why? Why do you need a congregation? Why isn't an AA group enough? Why do people
It's a
say, I
kind
wish
of congregation, right?
it is?
Lacking God's word.
Yes, but you have to answer the question, why does that matter? It's not enough to say it's God's word. Okay, but what word and why?
This is true in every aspect of life, right?
Yeah.
That there are sciences, there's observations, there's reason,
Right.
rationality, and everything has to be brought servant to God's
Right.
word, not alongside or
Right.
even above, but
Covering, as
but
I say, right? The
covered by
heavenly
God's
has
word.
to cover the earthly in meaning.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting that even in 2023, I was already moving towards that way of thinking about things.
Yeah.
Even though I'm writing this in a very not symbolic, pattern-wise, typological way, is asking.
But with that first quote, right?
Yeah.
It's right there. It's with symbol.
Yeah.
Or sign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So further, the basic text for Alcoholics Anonymous, called Alcoholics Anonymous, aka the Big Book, describes addiction to alcohol as a physical and mental compulsion to drink that results from an abnormal reaction to alcohol. That is, the individual cannot differentiate between normal drinking and excessive drinking. The Big Book notes, quote, "Here is the fellow who has been puzzling you, especially his lack of control. He does absurd, incredible, tragic things while drinking. He is a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But why? Why does the alcoholic behave like this?" The Big Book goes on to explain that. The truth, strange to say, is usually that he has no more idea why he took the first drink than you have. Some drinkers have excuses with which they are satisfied part of the time, but in their heart, they really do not know why they do it. Once this malady has a real hold, they are baffled, a baffled lot. There is the obsession that somehow, someday, they will beat the game, but they often suspect they are down for the count.
So you're caught in a double position, right?
Yeah, rock in a hard place.
At the same time.
Yeah. The Big Book also describes addiction as a progressive illness that can lead to physical, mental, and spiritual deterioration. This is due in part to the fact that over time the individual's tolerance for alcohol increases, leading them to drink more and more to achieve the same effect. Such tolerance is a physical phenomenon where the body adapts to the presence of alcohol and requires increasingly larger amounts to produce the same effect. This can lead to a dangerous cycle of increased consumption and physical damage. Overall, the Big Book of AA portrays addiction similarly to the previously mentioned descriptions as a complex and multifaceted phenomenon that involves both physical and mental factors. Like the previous descriptions, the Big Book emphasizes the importance of abstinence as the only effective solution to addiction and provides a framework for individuals to achieve and maintain sobriety. So, if you suffer from gambling addiction, do not only go into casinos, do not download apps on your phone that are gambling apps. Right? Don't download a poker game, for example, if you're addicted to gambling, because even
Probably
if
don't even play bingo at church.
No, 100%.
Yeah.
Because once you start, that door's open. It's God's warning to Joseph that sin is a predator that lurks at the door.
Yeah, standing at the door.
If you're addicted to, again, a person, going back to this point, if you're addicted to a person and you break up with that person, delete their number, lose their email, change your social circle, don't go to the places you used to go to with that person.
Yeah.
Because we call it triggering, but it is, you're replaying those old tapes because you're looking for that high again. The reason that it's so easy, for example, and I cover this in the book too, pornography is the kind of fast become the number one addiction. in the West in particular. Why? It's easily accessible. It's become more and more socially acceptable, and it's easily accessible. You don't have to find an adult
You say
bookstore.
easily accessible 3 different times?
I did, because that's the key.
That is the key.
You don't have to park in an alley or a block away from the adult bookstore.
There's no social stigma.
There's no
really.
social stigma. As I said on another interview with our friend Kelsey, I flew out to San Diego last year, and the man across the aisle from me was watching a porn video on his iPad on the plane, in the same way that you or I would watch a movie. And I'm looking at that, and at first I was like, maybe it was just a scene in a movie. And I look back over, I'm like, no, that's porn. I'm like, there's children and people, and he's just watching it. And
Well,
no one
he's got
said
his earbuds
anything.
in.
Yeah, he
so-
did. To be fair, he had his earbuds in. But I'm like, number one, why are you watching porn on a plane? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, the depravity of that, right?
Right. Is that
Yeah.
he's not even physically getting off on it. It's the mental and emotional engagement.
What's
that
the
he's-
opposite of this? What are they calling this? Raw dogging it, right?
Yeah.
Have you seen that where
Yeah.
you for plane flights?
Yeah.
Where you don't get up, no
Right.
no drinks, no only
Well,
stare
that's what I
forward.
do. Yeah, I don't
Nothing.
drink or
No
eat
no
anything.
stimulation,
No.
nothing. Just sit there.
Yeah. Well, I don't do that. That's insane. But
Well, that's what,
no
that's
eating or
what-
drinking, just sit
that's why
down
they're
and watch
trying-
your
well,
movie.
Definitely don't drink the coffee, by the way. Not just because it's bad
Dear
coffee.
God, no.
Because it's bad water.
Yeah.
It's bad water.
Yeah.
Those tanks are gross.
But it is to the point we were discussing previous, which is depending on the level of social stigma, that establishes a standard of behavior.
Yeah.
So certain addictions, like Adderall addiction, completely socially acceptable now.
Yeah. Well, and here in Wisconsin, alcohol,
Totally
problem.
socially acceptable, right?
No problem.
And of course, we also seek out the company then of those people, those individuals who will help us perpetuate this habit.
Yeah.
That's why it's progressive.
Like your alcohol addiction.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't be friends with people who like to go to bars.
I can, but it's never going to be an intimate
I can't ever
relationship.
go to a bar with them. Yeah.
Correct. It's not going to be intimate because we can't have that shared experience.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Likewise, I can't, well, even more to your point, I can't hang out with people that take opiates.
Oh, I can imagine.
Alcohol, I don't have alcohol cravings anymore. I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was in the ER and they gave me Dilaudid and Ativan and morphine,
Those are
all
some
the
triggers.
receptors kicked in.
Oh,
All
yeah.
of them were like, oh, we're back. We're back.
Isn't that amazing? Because
Yeah.
how long had it been? And then it's just like
Decades. Yeah.
and it's
So
just-
for me, that was very telling that, okay, alcohol is not your problem. This is.
yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean then that I drink recreationally or however you want to say it because I don't have cravings. Because again, the door is shut. And also just the physical downside of drinking alcohol
yeah.
because it is poisoning you.
Oh yeah.
You can't, people aren't going to like this, but Dr. Ron Patrick is pointing this out. Even one beer physically affects your biome. It destroys your gut biome. It destroys your intestinal biome. You're ruining your body. Just one beer. Because again, it's not the beer that you may brew, for example, that has 2 or 3 ingredients. There's so many chemicals in that alcohol to make you addicted to it.
So there is I don't know which came first, actually. There seems to be a parallel between this and cognitive behavioral therapy.
Sure.
Where, of all the psychology kind of fields, that one resonates the most with me, which is change the behavior, changes your attitudes,
right, 100%, right.
Scenario.
For example, I take GABA every day for my anxiety.
Okay.
It's an amino, right?
Okay.
And it changes my brain chemistry.
Yeah.
Many would say positively because I'm in a much better mood most of the time.
Yeah.
And also I'm not crippled by anxiety, which induces all kinds of physical side effects.
Sure.
This is cognitive. This is a part of that.
Well, CBT is even simpler than
and
that. Like
CBD, yeah. I
go
take
out
my
or
mushrooms
CBT,
every day.
cognitive behavioral therapy.
Right.
Just go for a walk.
Right.
Eat a banana.
Yeah.
Because obviously potassium, but also just
right.
Well,
yeah, we walk around outside in bare feet all the time.
Yeah. Get some
it's called
sun.
grounding. It's not woo-woo. It's a fact.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. So you look at that and it's like, well, maybe changing your routine. That's another way.
Yeah, for sure.
If every morning you wake up, you pull out your phone and then you make a cup of coffee and you said you're addicted for a while.
For example, in recovery, they'll tell you, depending on where you go, the counselors in recovery will say, okay, in the morning, you're going to get up and you're going to write, you're going to journal, but you're going to journal about what you're grateful for today because we have to change your pattern because every day you get up, and you get your high and you look at the world and it sucks. Why does it suck? Because it's not because you've created a world in which you suck.
Yeah.
And therefore the world around you sucks because it's your
Well, that sounds like PTSD as well.
It's well,
I mean,
that's
are they?
yeah.
They're obviously broken in other ways.
Post-traumatic stress, they got rid of the D now because it's not a
Not a
disorder.
disorder.
But post-traumatic stress is, well, what's the stress from? Trauma. What's the trauma from?
And
Well,
then you just keep reliving it. You're almost
right.
addicted to
Correct.
to that.
That's what relapsing is. You go back and you start reliving the addiction. You
So one of
seek
the
out
things I've seen that's
those
been helpful for
experiences.
that is the dogs, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Comfort
the
dogs.
dog, yeah, in the morning, like the dog gets up and needs to
Right.
go out, and that breaks your routine right away. You have to
No
live for
matter
the dog.
how bad my morning goes, and my mornings never go bad, just to be fair and clear and honest. But if my dog comes in and puts her head on the bed and I pet my dog, the world's a good place again. Or the cat comes and lays on my lap and purrs. I'm like, somebody loves me, right? It changes your whole pattern is changed by the fact that this animal came and went, I love you.
Well, that's why dog is a man's best friend. I mean, obviously you have a spouse and other things, but
right.
But that's the reason for it. It's
my wife
it's
ain't going to sit there and die.
Well, the dog
die.
is as unconditional as a relationship can get, probably.
But in those little examples, then this is what you're describing, but it's also then again, when you get out of rehab, you can't go back to your friendships because you have to learn in rehab. This is this downstream from your addiction. It's still your responsibility, but downstream from it is your choices, your relationships. You can't be financially responsible because everything is patterned after how do I get high? How do I stay high? Every day after day.
This is why you'll see people move.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of like celebrities. They'll leave Hollywood.
Yeah.
They won't live in Hollywood anymore.
Yeah, Tom Holland did that.
Did he?
Spider-Man star. Yeah. He's like, I'm an alcoholic, so I moved back to London so I could be close to my family.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's the obvious, dramatic ones like Barenthal or
right.
Who am I thinking? Oh, LaBouffe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's all a part of it. But Pastor Riley, Pastor Gillespie, when are you get into the theology part of it? Right now. Thank you for asking, kind listener. What about the addict's soul? Here's where the rubber hits the road.
Yep.
Everything we just talked about is the therapeutic side of the house. We have to now cross and sit on the other side of the table, cross the street, and ask, well, what about the soul? You've talked about the brain, you've talked about the heart, you've talked about the body, but what about the soul, the seat of life? How does one recover what is seemingly lost and cannot be grasped by human hands? Do these standard accepted definitions of addiction go deep enough to explain the roots of addiction? Well, now we come to part 2. How addiction becomes our God. If you've read my first book, this might sound familiar. What if we consider another approach to addiction that begins with a theological explanation? What if we start by admitting that our addiction goes deeper than physical and psychological dependence? What if we begin by confessing that the one we are addicted to has become our God? That thing, sorry.
Lowercase g.
Lowercase. In the Bible, for example, we get a picture of how addiction can become a god. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Christians in Rome, writes, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Romans chapter 1, verse 25. In this verse, the apostle is describing how people can become so focused on material possessions or physical pleasures that they begin to worship and serve them instead of the true God. Another example is found in the story of the Israelites in the book of Exodus, where they turn away from God and begin to worship a golden calf they have made. This idol becomes the sole focus of their worship, and they are willing to sacrifice for it, even willingly disobeying God's command that they will put no other gods before my face. This is important to me, anyways, is that obviously, I think, in Exodus, the assumption is there are other gods, and they are real, right? In
Even
other,
if made of wood
not just
and stone.
wood and stone, not just a piece of wood. You silly Israelites worshiping wood.
Those are, what do you want to say, icons, representatives?
Those are the earthly
token,
icon, image of a spiritual personality, a presence.
Yeah.
In myth, the demigods are presented as, well, in Christian tradition, the demigods are fallen angels.
Yeah.
That's why there is a universal overlap between religions when it comes to these things.
And Jesus affirms this. I mean, at least with mammon, right?
Sure.
Refers to this
Right.
spiritual force called mammon.
And so I bring this up because behind every bottle, behind every slot, behind every phone, there is a spiritual power, a presence that is influencing your choices. This is the point. These are not abstractions. These are not ideas. They are not emotions. Those are downstream from the higher truth, which is that the earthly embodiment of this spiritual presence is the bottle, is the drug, is the slot machine, is the phone.
Do we have a name for that spiritual force, the god of, like, say, alcohol? Because we do with others, like you have like with pornography, there's the succubus, right?
Yeah.
So
right.
I mean, there are
the demonic, right?
There are even
Right.
names for that particular demonic
There
force.
are, and they, like Bacchus, for example.
Oh, Bacchus, yeah, there you go. The god of wine
and orgies and the woods,
yes.
right? And so if you go to a non-Roman tradition, you go backwards to Greek or you go forwards to Norse, for example, there is a god or goddess of wine and
so
orgies.
they named it, those cultures.
Well, here's the thing. In the tradition, it's this, right? Is that spirits don't have bodies, and the thing that the fallen angels want more than anything is the
To inhabit
ability,
a body.
the power to influence the world. This is why Satan inhabits the serpent and appears as he does with his wings. He didn't have his legs taken away from him. He had his wings plucked
So to
off.
manipulate the physical.
Correct.
Okay.
And because they can't take possession of someone by force, they have to be invited in. This is where this tradition comes from with vampires. Is that they can't influence the physical world directly, so they have to either embody someone's person to physically interact with the world, or they influence the person to then act on these suggestions.
So, and that's usually words. That's the way that
Correct.
I see
They
it.
whisper in your ear. They send their other. This goes back to your earlier point. They send their agents to tempt you to open the door to them.
Right.
So that's why when you get out of rehab, I can't go.
Become embodied.
Right. They cast spells.
Okay.
And so you go back to your social group after you get out of rehab, and all of a sudden, a week later, you're back in a bar and you've relapsed. How did that happen? Because the spirit that you rejected has emissaries, agents, who then came to you and went, "You're not that bad. You can have 1 or 2 drinks." And now what happened? You opened the door, and now you're being backpacked.
And Jesus warns about the house swept and put in order.
Correct.
Right.
That is one of the best parables for relapsing.
Yeah. The 7 worse than the first.
Right. So on the theological side of this, then we're asking, how does one open one's soul to not an idea or a feeling, but rather an actual God, small g God? And I cover this in the book. We have to name the God. We have to name the thing that is influencing and afflicting us.
Is it because we don't have these more iconic idols that we don't actually believe the power of these
They've
spirits?
all been Disneyfied.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Well, no, but I mean, they're even they just don't have the same kind of representative force.
That's what I'm saying. They've been Disneyfied. Go watch Hercules, the Disney version of Hercules.
Like, the animation is terrible. I can't watch it.
But there's a Pan is in the movie.
Is he? Oh,
Bacchus is in the movie.
Oh,
he's a sidekick
to Hercules.
He doesn't come into and he doesn't come into town and seduce all the virgins and get them drunk in the woods and makes love to them and then leave them pregnant. That's not very Disney. And yet that's the true mythology. Tolkien complains about this with fairies and how the Victorians made fairies nice and lovable and cute. And he's like, they're none of those things because they're fallen angels.
I think gnomes are never going to be cute. I know what
I love gnomes.
They try to make gnomes cute.
I found out on the dark web there's a company and you can hire them to gnome people's yards where they just show up and put hundreds of gnomes in the yard. And they even on the website, they even say, and if you want us to do this to the interior of their house, no security measure can stop us.
That has to be dark web, yeah.
Yeah. And they even have cursed gnomes where if you get a gnome, like they'll put 1 gnome on the yard. And if you get rid of it, then they come back and put 2 and then 3 and then 4. And they just keep doing that. And
where there's
it's
a market.
yeah,
I
I'm just like, that's
suppose.
wild. And they have pictures, proof of they have proof of satisfied customers, like great service. Again, I'm horrified by we can get past any security measures, but on the other hand, I'm super impressed with it.
Wow.
I think that would be great for people's birthdays, anniversaries, bar mitzvahs,
So
whatever.
my point, I mean, I'm thinking of Luther here, call a thing what it is.
Yes,
Being a theologian
correct.
of the cross.
Yep.
So it's an idol. You call it an idol. Is there
It's
there
a
an
little
advantage to naming it?
Yes, you have to.
Okay.
As I've said when I counsel people about a porn addiction, you have to call a succubus or an incubus what they are. And when we function purely materialistically, we go, but that's not a succubus. It's just a woman on OnlyFans. I'm like, yeah, that's the physical embodiment of the demon.
Just because it's been digitized doesn't mean.
Now ask on a purely material level, do you give your life energy to this? Of course you do. You masturbate. That's why you're doing this, the mechanical side of things. Well, if you're ejaculating, you're giving this succubi your life force. That's literally the textbook definition of what a succubus or an incubus does.
Right.
So therefore, you are also yourself physically demonstrating by the act, the physical act, that you are giving your life force to a succubi.
And there's always that abstraction layer anyway.
Well, we want that to justify and remove ourselves, give ourselves distance from the thing, right? We're not worshiping the bull.
And that's Aaron's excuse with the golden calf.
Right. Right.
It's just like, it's God's footstool. It's just it's just a representative thing.
Right. It's just an icon. What can it hurt?
The other aspect of that story that's incredible to me, I always try to remember this, is that much later on, we find out that they brought all of the Egyptian gods with them.
Yes, they did.
And so to build a golden calf, it's like, well, of course, that's what they did in Egypt.
To your point, do you worship one god in the pantheon? No, of course not. The whole pantheon comes with. You're not going to pick and choose.
Right. Well, I have my favorites anyway.
Right. Everyone has their favorites. But if you're going to worship Thor, Baldur's going to show up some point.
And, I guess to the Spirit's credit, I mean, he doesn't dwell on it too much in the inspired words, but it's there.
Right. Oh, you want to know how this affects people today? Think of the Norns, the fates. You can't negotiate with fate. You can't trick fate. How many plots and how many movies and TV shows and novels and how many people say, well, it's just fate. We were fated to be together.
Or fortune.
You're literally, well, fortune's a whole nother god, but
right.
Same thing is Augustine in the City of God deals with this. Actually, he names these things for what they are. And luck is the big one. Luck, fortune, it's a demon. It's a fallen
angel. We say it. I mean, we invoke it. That's the thing.
Good luck.
It drives me crazy. Yeah.
Good luck.
Like I don't need luck.
There's only one who's good, God.
Yeah.
So by calling luck good, you're acknowledging, whether you know it or not, that you've put another God before.
It might be awkward at first, but say something like God provide.
Right. God bless you.
Or God bless.
It's very simple. But again, it seems semantic in modern culture, but in the ancient world, you would never ever say you would never say that flippantly. No. Because you are invoking gods. And so, yes, to your point again, it's abstracted now. It's consumer driven. It's Disneyfied. In the ancient world, as a Christian, I would never, ever say good luck.
We hear all sorts of things like this. Like, I need my me time.
Yeah, 100%.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's original sin in a nutshell.
There's no me time.
Right.
No one lives for themselves alone.
No.
That's...
They used to say, I'm going to go pray. I need to pray.
Yeah. Yeah. Or what is it? Oh, it's not even self-help time. What do they call this stuff? Where it's like,
no, it's me time.
Yeah, me time. I guess it's as good as any.
Yep. So these examples demonstrate how when we become addicted to something, we can easily prioritize it over the true God and willingly allow it to become our God. Small g. Addiction can then cause us to worship and serve something other than God. And this can ultimately lead us away from the truth about God, ourselves, and the nature of our addiction, resulting in habitual, self-sabotaging, self-destructive choices. Adding to the previous biblical teachings, when we view addiction in light of Martin Luther's definition of a God being something which we fear, love, and trust above all things. We begin with the jarring truth that we fear, love, and trust something more than the God who created and redeemed us. Then we recognize that addiction not only solves a powerful attachment to a substance or behavior, which takes precedence over other priorities in a person's life, it drives us away from the source of our overall health and well-being. Starting our examination of addiction in this way, we quickly become aware of the truth that addiction is more than just a physical or psychological affliction. It is a form of worship or devotion, as the individual's thoughts, actions, and emotions are taken captive to satisfy their craving or dependency. In addiction, fear, love, and trust become centered on the substance or behavior that is the object of addiction. The individual may fear the consequences of not having access to their addiction, love the euphoric sensations or escape it provides, and trust that it will deliver relief from emotional pain or physical distress. Over time, the addictive substance or behavior becomes a source of security and comfort, and the individual becomes deeply entrenched in their attachment as they grow more and more dependent on a capricious, unforgiving God. This dynamic of fear and love and trust forms the subtext of every interaction between God and his people in the Bible. In the story of King Saul in 1 Samuel 15, God commands Saul to destroy the Amalekites, but Saul disobeys and spares the king and some of the best livestock. When the prophet Samuel confronts Saul about his disobedience, Saul responds by saying he fears the people and listens to their voices instead of obeying God's command. As a result of Saul's disobedience and fear of the people, God rejects him as king. Likewise, in the account of the rich young ruler in Mark chapter 10, a materially wealthy young man asks Jesus what he must do to inherit eternal life. And Jesus tells him to sell all he has and give it to the poor. However, the young man loves his possessions more than God, so he goes away sad and doesn't follow after Jesus. We are no different. Even though more than 2,000 years stand between us, the rich young man and Saul, in the present, the fear component of addiction can also be seen in the anxiety and distress that addicts experience when they are unable to engage in their addictive behavior. For example, a person addicted to alcohol may experience extreme anxiety and fear when they are unable to obtain their next drink. Similarly, a person addicted to gambling may feel intense fear and panic when they are unable to place a bet or engage in other gambling activities. Similar to fear, the love component of addiction is evident in the way that addicts often prioritize their addictive behavior above all else. This can be seen in the way that addicts will frequently sacrifice their relationships, careers, and other important aspects of their lives to continue engaging in their addiction. A person addicted to drugs may prioritize their drug use over their job, their family, and their health, even if doing so leads to severe negative consequences. Finally, trusting something more than the true God can be found in the story of the Israelites in Numbers 13 and 14. God promises to give the Israelites the land of Canaan, but when the spies return from their reconnaissance mission, 10 of them provide a negative report, causing the people to fear the inhabitants of the land and doubt God's promise. As a result of their lack of trust, the Israelites are unable to enter the promised land until after they have wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Trusting in a false God is just as evident in the way that addicts often rely on their addictive behavior to provide them with a sense of comfort or relief from their problems. This can be seen in the way that addicts will often turn to their addiction as a way to cope with stress, anxiety, or other negative emotions. A person addicted to food, for example, may turn to binge eating as a way to cope with stress or emotional pain, even if doing so leads to negative consequences such as weight gain, health problems, and social isolation. And so, like any false deity that we turn to for help, addiction will demand immense sacrifices from those who worship it. The individual will neglect important responsibilities, relationships, and personal health to maintain their addiction. Even when the negative consequences of addiction become apparent, the individual will continue to prioritize their attachment over other aspects of their life. As the previous biblical examples demonstrate, there are serious repercussions when we fear, love, and trust something more than the true God. We miss out on blessings and fail to receive what God has promised us because we avoid seeking His guidance and following His will for our lives. Therefore, with these three components of false belief and addiction in front of us, Martin Luther's definition of what a God is, which is to fear, love, and trust something more than the true God, is an apt description of addiction. Furthermore, as Luther writes in the Large Catechism, a God is the term for that to which we are to look for all good, and in which we are to find refuge in all need. In this light, addiction can be seen as a false god that addicts worship and rely on, even though doing so ultimately leads to severe negative consequences and harms both the addict and those around them. Just as with any false god, addiction ultimately fails to deliver on its promises, leading the addict through euphoria and an escape from pain and struggle into insanity, incarceration, or self annihilation. As a consequence, individuals with addiction will find that their addiction becomes increasingly costly, both in terms of the harm it causes to their own lives and the lives of those around them. As the addiction continues to demand more and more from them, addicts will experience deteriorating physical and mental health, strained relationships with loved ones, financial difficulties, legal problems, and worst of all, a sense that God has cursed or abandoned them. This sense of abandonment can further lead individuals to act in kind, neglecting or even abandoning the things they truly value in life, such as their faith, relationships, work, and moral courage. Addiction becomes the primary focus of their life, eclipsing all other priorities and values, ultimately leading them astray and causing them to lose sight of what is truly important, which stems entirely from their false worship of an idol that demands they sacrifice everything, even their lives, to it.
So you're using the framework of the first commandment.
Correct.
In its explanation from Luther, right?
Yes.
And we apply this in every setting, don't we?
Yes.
When we're thinking about idolatry, we thank Luther for that. The one thing that I'm struck by, because we're in the week before the beginning of Lent.
Correct.
And the historic practice in Lent is abstinence.
It is abstinence.
And I know it's seasonal, and generally it's at least in modern parlance, it's like you give up something that you love. Right. So, but in that way, it is seeking, at least temporarily,
Right.
and maybe to test the thing to see if it is idolatry.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can I go 40 days without it? If I can, then it's not my God. If I can just
Right. The purpose of fasting, not just the physical act of not eating, but the practice of fasting is to prepare for prayer.
Well, and I've often said the Ember Days also
Right.
generally have had meals attached to them. So
Right.
you would abstain, from a meal and a half, but you would share that food then with the poor.
Right.
So that's part of the problem with addiction. It's inherently selfish.
Yes.
And
self-annihilating. Yeah.
Self-annihilating, as you said, yeah. And so these penitential practices,
right,
they're not just about overcoming sin, although, God willing, the Holy Spirit works that.
Yeah.
But it's turning you outward.
Right.
And I'm also struck by another thing. I don't know if I've thought about this before, is that, as the quote from The Princess Bride, life is pain, princess, right?
Yeah.
Is that you're just substituting one kind of pain for another kind of pain.
Right.
You're not actually avoiding pain. I know maybe biochemically you are,
Right.
but all the downstream consequences are
What
painful.
you're replacing is bearing the cross
Mm-hmm.
with a self-chosen cross, something that,
So
again,
it's a different cross.
right. The euphoria is the gleam of the bull, the calf. The initial gleam of the
shininess,
calf
shiny.
is the gleaming glow, as I call it. When Moses came down from the mountain, he had a gleaming glow about him. Is that you're replacing God's glory with what we call euphoria, and you're replacing God's cross that he lays upon you.
Isn't there an Amazon TV show called that?
What's that? Euphoria?
Euphoria.
Yes, there is. That's right.
I think it's Amazon. Yeah.
I tried. I couldn't.
I didn't even bother because I figured the subject matter is exactly this.
Yes, it is.
It's actually, it is what the title says.
It's nihilistic as usual, but yes.
Yeah.
And so, right, is that the purpose in the ancient and medieval church for fasting was to prepare for prayer.
Well, they would also abstain from sexual relations too.
That's what I'm saying, is that fasting isn't just I'm not eating.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
It's I'm not consuming. That is.
But there is a replacement.
What are my passions?
Yeah.
And it's the passions that replace the suffering of the cross. So as I've said, you can either suffer for Christ or you can suffer Christ.
So during that season of fasting, this would be an advantage if we had things like Stations of the Cross in our churches.
Right.
Because then
chastity in this case is I'm not drinking. Why? Because I have to remain chaste. Why? Because the alcohol inflames my passions, to use medieval language, right? When you read medieval poetry, for example, following Chaucer and Dante, it's incredibly romantic. And a lot of medieval poetry comes from the Song of Songs.
It's incredible. It's the most commentated on book of the Bible. And
But
it's
you'll
the
notice
one that we
by the
speak
Renaissance,
of the least, yes.
The Song of Songs is almost gone, but the language remains. And there becomes this obsession with justifying certain passions and saying, well, they're not vices, because to be in love, to be passionately in love, that there's nothing wrong with that, especially in an age in which arranged marriages were the norm.
Isn't that what who told us that? Love is love.
Romantic love and choosing your partner and dating is a very modern invention. But in an era when people are saying we don't get a choice about who we marry, especially amongst the aristocrats, romantic poems are fantastically, what do you want to say, titillating.
Because it's directed towards the forbidden.
Right. Well, it's also noting that this romance, this desire is God sent, right? And yet within that is always the warning that if you allow your passions to overtake you, they will destroy you, right? In the tale of Sigurd and Fafnir, Sigurd finally finds the dragon, and the dragon spews poison, right? So you have to be very careful then when you cut the dragon that you don't get touched by this acid. So when Fafnir is defeated by Sigurd, he warns Sigurd, he goes, I know what you're coming for. You think you're killing me, and that your whole purpose was to find me and to kill me because I'm this great threat to the people, right? But you're going to take my treasure. And so
you really become cursed yourself.
So the real reason that you've actually hunted me down is because of greed, not because of heroism or courage.
Ooh.
And he says, in the end, you're going to kill me, but you'll be destroyed by my treasure. And sure enough, he's destroyed by it. He's destroyed by it because it's his greed that actually drives him. It's not courage or bravery.
And we see this in so many things in life. Like, like people, what begins as a noble venture.
Right.
It's like, well, I just want to serve God. I want to serve the people.
Right.
And then it becomes this ego trip, and then it becomes this something else.
But
greed.
Think how easy it is to evangelize a people when that legend is one of the central narratives of their culture. You as a Christian going, yeah, the dragon's Satan, and the poison he spews is the temptation to sin and to, worship false gods. And Sigurd is all of us, especially in a culture that values the warrior ethos, the warrior mentality.
Sure.
All you have to do is just commentate on it from a Christian perspective to go, no, this is great. This is a great story, right?
Yeah.
Because they're telling the story in such a way that they're saying, we want you kids to grow up to be great warriors, but also be very clear that if you're going to go on some great quest, let's all be honest. We're really doing it for the mineral resources that are in the ground.
Oh, I was going to use the Crusades, but you went more contemporary.
Same
Okay.
different, right?
Yeah.
Is
there's a financial advantage.
There is, yes, at least financial. And so the draw then of the first commandment, which is again a promise, you will not have other gods. But I think what happens when we abbreviate it in this way, and I try to be very intentional about this to not do that, is you will put no other gods before my face.
Right.
Quite like an actual physical, like I'm going to put this God that I carved in front of you to replace you, essentially, right? And or at the very least a footstool, as you noted, a kind of telephone booth
right.
to communicate with the gods. You're doing more than just building something. You're now committed to that. You're fearing it, you're loving it, you're trusting it. And in doing so, it takes your heart. This is why the first commandment and the 9th and 10th commandments are really two sides of one coin.
Yeah, it's almost a circular logic.
It really is,
yeah.
right? Because whatever I covet, which is an emotional, heartfelt, literally response to something that grabs me and says, this, my heart is attached to this now. This is the danger of love, is once your heart attaches itself to someone or something, good luck not thinking about that. Good luck not wanting that, or even maneuvering yourself in such a way that you're not even conscious that you're hunting for the opportunity to get that.
Well, the desire for it is because it's not from God.
Right. So what fasting is then is that I need to clear the decks of everything that gets between myself and my God.
And asceticism in a general sense too,
right?
I suppose.
Well, you have the 7 deadly sins to reflect on as an example.
Well, we've
nice
talked
template.
about, I mean, I know they can find you on if you're living off the grid, but the appeal of off-grid living is one, dependence upon what God gives, right? What the land gives, etc. And two, like what can I remove that's getting in the way of faith and love?
In a cultural sense, we're all aware of what a mortal sin is, but we downplay venial sins.
Sure.
But we don't call that culturally. But to go off grid is to say I need to escape not just the mortal sins, the threat of X, Y, and Z, but the venial sins, the daily temptation to do X, Y, and Z things that I find abhorrent, right?
And it could be in a more communal way, not like an isolated way.
Yeah.
You know, like the family, like compound.
Right, the early monastic tradition where whole families would become monks and take vows of chastity.
My vicarage congregation was a start by Wilhelm Leah, where he sent missionaries over, and he intentionally laid out that village with the church at the center. All the houses were adjacent to each other, and then they had like shotgun style properties behind them. So they would farm behind the homes, but the homes were all closely gathered. So you had a short walk to church.
Sure.
You could walk to your neighbor. And yet it was isolated. I mean, it was supposed to be a mission to the American Indians that were there. I can't remember which ones. And so, I mean, there have been attempts at this where it's kind of off grid, I guess. It's not, but it's not isolated, right? So you're still, yeah. So I suppose you could do it. You could take the TV out of your home. I know I have quite a few friends that have done that.
Right.
That's one way.
We did that.
Did you?
Well, we moved it. There is no such thing as a living room TV.
Oh, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. When you see my house, you will despise me, but that's okay. Because I'm worse than any.
We all make choices.
Yeah, we do. You do. You'll like the dining room though. What was I gonna say? Yeah, I don't. But you can sense in my hesitation how hard it is to give up.
Well, of course it is, because
you're captive.
It's appealing to your passions.
Yeah.
And one of the words for passion is love.
Right. But it's a binding love.
It is a binding love. That's what passion is. Passionate romances rarely last because they burn hot.
But the memory of them lasts.
But the memory lasts forever because they burn so hot.
Yeah.
You bear the burn wounds.
Thank you, Janis Joplin.
Well, there you go. That too. Ball and chain. But
better to burn out than fade away.
That wasn't Janis Joplin.
She sang it.
No. Neil Young did.
Oh, he did. But he was singing about her.
Hey, hey, my. Yeah, but he was singing about her. Yes.
There we go. Okay. Thank you. Whew.
Rock and roll will never die. It's better to burn out than fade away.
Yeah.
Hey, hey, my. So yes, this is the recognition then that, okay, I'm struggling with X, so I'm going to give up X for the next 40 days.
I'm laughing because
you're still
like,
downstream. You're still downstream.
40,
You're
why
pretty far
40 days?
downstream, but
Why not just say, I'm just done with it?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
If it's destructive to you, as I noted, if it's affecting your family, your career, your financial responsibilities, and so on, and it's having negative health consequences overall and then very narrowly, eliminate it.
Right. So what are some of the other ones? Like, I can't
By
remember
the
which
way,
month.
to the point, because again, this is the most common. If you're struggling with porn addiction, put child locks on your phone and your iPad and and by the
Actually,
way,
you have to have other people put child locks on your phone.
and also then hold yourself accountable to other people for your sin and ask them for absolution. You have to have that. You have to.
Yeah.
You can't say, I'm going to give this up, but I'm not going to tell my spouse or my family or my friends or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's like if you're watching porn at work, go to your manager or your boss or your supervisor and say, hey, I need to talk to you. And I just want you to know this is something that I struggle with and I need somebody to hold me accountable. So I'm going to tell you about this. I totally understand if you're upset about it, but it's affecting my work. I love being here. I love working for you. I want to improve. And so, hey, can we put restrictions on my computer? And we can have monthly,
or on the Wi-Fi or whatever.
Whatever, but just like we can touch base monthly and we can just have a sit down with each other and say, hey, how you doing this month? How are things going? If it's not your boss or your manager or coworker, somebody that you can sit down with and say, I need to confess. I need someone who's going to hold me accountable to these things. Again, you need a community of support. You do. You can't do this alone.
Yeah, but you know what we're fearful of?
Well, yeah, of course.
Is that that's not going to be unconditional.
Well, you're going to get fired.
Right.
Or, yeah.
Or divorced or
whatever, right.
Whatever, yeah.
But again, getting out of rehab, I've had to say to some people, yeah, I understand why you're getting divorced.
Yeah. Or you can't work there anymore.
You married into addiction, or you're in an environment that supports your, because yeah, you go to someone and confide in them and go, it's not that big of a deal. Don't worry about it.
Maybe you can't work at a place where you're in front of a computer.
Sure. That too. Right.
You work at the factory or you do
whatever it may be.
Flipping burgers or whatever.
But accountability is key. Then you have to be chaste. I've said this to homosexuals even. Yeah. They've asked me, is homosexuality a sin? I go, yeah, just like heterosexuality is a sin when you act upon it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to live a celibate life. You have to be chaste. Well, that's difficult. No one said it was easy.
Oh, we would actually say it's impossible.
Dying to self.
What's the name of your book again?
The Impossible Prize.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Crucifying. And so you have to go before God and say, Lord, crucify me, kill me. I must decrease that you may increase. Well, what is the thing? What is the passion that's getting between you? And I told the story again that really impressed me. I can't remember who it was, but he's a monk. And he was asked, does it ever bother you that you don't have friends? Because he lived a very isolated life to your off the grid point. Mm-hmm. And he said, my best friend is God. My friend is God. He's the best friend you could have because whenever I need him, he's there. He always listens. He's always absolving me. He's always helping me when I need help. So no, I don't.
There's nothing nothing that he can't.
Correct. So no, I don't worry about not having more friends. I have Christ. Mm-hmm. And again, that may sound abstract or woo-woo or romantic, but it's not.
Because especially if you've at all taken advantage of confessing.
Yes, that too. Yeah. But just think about what prayer is, first of all.
Right.
And if you don't have a robust prayer life, so to speak, it's because you're not talking to God. You're thinking of prayer as something other than, I need to go talk to God because it's been a day. Or I'm going to pray to God this morning that you protect me from sin and every evil, mm-hmm. and that all my doings in life may please you, mm-hmm. as we pray.
Yeah.
You're just having a conversation with your friend. Oh, what a friend. Again, of all the bad hymns written in modernity, what a friend we have in Jesus actually kind of gets to the point.
It does.
Right?
Yeah.
And
it maybe we describe it as a little, I guess, shallow. Is that right? Or trite?
It's a little soft.
It's soft.
But it's true.
Soft. But it's true. Yeah.
Because who is going to rescue you from the thing that gets between you and your job, your family, your health, your overall life? Because Jesus says, I am life.
Well, and that was the point with confession. The only way that you could actually confess this to God is to know that he won't forsake you, even if everyone else has to.
Right. Exactly.
Because
at the bottom of everything, when I used to get high, the most common conversation was about higher truth.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a kind of a trope amongst potheads.
Oh, well, and now it's with the ayahuasca trips.
Right, exactly. But what are we doing? We're trying to find the God who abandoned us. And we're so desperate for him now
Wow.
that we will,
that's a basic lie right at the get.
right,
Oh.
we will do anything to find him,
Hmm.
so long as I don't have to go to the altar. I'll go to the altar and
Everywhere but where he's promised to be.
I'll sit with a priest and I'll drink ayahuasca, or I'll go sit with a group of people in a circle and share my feelings and my experiences, my strength, my hope, and so on. But don't ask me to kneel before an altar. Well, if you're afraid to go there, that's because that's actually where God is at for you.
That's the fear.
By the way,
love, and
he
trust.
is there at the ayahuasca ceremony, and he's there because he is all in all.
Uh-huh.
We live and move and have our being in him. But where is he for you for the forgiveness of sin?
Right.
Because even the demons know who he is. But he is not there for them in mercy. And so, as Dr.
Even with people who have had this, I mean, it's just a question.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of it's specific the use of microdosing psilocybin.
Sure.
You know, I mean, it seems to be advantageous to people who've been addicted.
Yes. Right.
But what is it? What's the mechanism there?
Right.
I mean, obviously there's a chemical mechanism.
Right.
But
that's medicinal and reparative. It's reconstructive.
Yeah, and they often overlay it with a pseudo theological.
Well, I would say this is that, and I'll use the language of the early church, is there's a grace there, right? Is that God's grace, God makes the sun and the rain to fall on both the good and evil alike, as Jesus says in Matthew.
Yeah, and it gives us plants, and
it gives us
for
everything,
medicine and for everything.
And he gives us doctors, and he gives us medicines and healers. Those are graces. And if we think of grace narrowly, we usually refer to God's favor in the sense of the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you, be gracious to you. The Aaronic blessing. That is a very narrow grace. It's a very specific for you-ness. It's a promise. It's gospel. But the broader grace is God makes the rain fall upon the fields of the evil.
I think our Baptist friends call that common grace.
Right.
The grace that's extended to everyone.
Everyone, right. Common grace, yes.
Yeah.
And so when we become too narrow in our definition of grace, we overlook where God is active in the world. And going back to the example of Sigrun and Fafnir, we can't then point at the story and go, this is actually about the fall. Or this is actually about the devil and temptation. Because we go, well, no, that's outside, versus nothing's outside of God.
No.
Everything is downstream from the tree of life. Everything is downstream from Jesus.
It's possible that it's a intentional rejection of the truth.
Well, of course.
As well.
Of course it is.
Not just a positive confession.
But my point is that everyone is looking for, this is Augustine's point, right? Our heart is restless until it finds its rest in thee.
Right.
Everyone, especially right now, at least in my experience, everyone is looking for God. I have people I know who have gone back to find paganism because they're saying
there's got to be a higher truth. Yeah.
There's got to be a higher truth. And all of these things that are being pushed on TV, they're all paganism without all the good parts.
Well, our anti-globalist conspiracy there's a deity aspect of it.
Well, there's tribalism locked in there, which tribalism is downstream from community. Community is downstream from congregation.
Well, I think maybe what we're saying is we're calling out the idolatry of human progress or something.
Right.
Right. Or that global leaders can play God. Right. With the microchips or whatever it is. Yeah.
Again, addiction is a progressive affliction, a progressive disease, if you want to call it that. It doesn't. There, in a sense, there again, the man takes the drink, then the drink takes the man kind of thing, in the sense of when I got high for the first time, that was my bliss, that was my euphoria. And then I just spent years chasing.
I need that. I need that.
I need it. Yeah. This is what, again, where have you been my whole life kind of thing. But the whole, I was talking about this on Kelsey's podcast, is that opiates never broke their promise to me. Every single time I popped a pill, I took a Percocet, it did exactly what it promised me it was going to do.
That's the advantage of pharmaceutical grade.
But what it didn't do, and this is the key, because this is the original temptation in the garden, what it didn't do is it told me, I promise you these are the short-term consequences, and they're wonderful, and they are. But what it didn't tell me is, by the way, in 10 years, your life will be a stagnant dumpster fire, and you will have no friends, no relationships, and you'll be dying. He never tells you what's coming. He only tells you what's about to happen. And that's how you get trapped in addiction, because it's always, I know in 20 minutes, everything will be great again.
Is it because we don't know the future?
Right.
God doesn't reveal that to us. I mean, certain aspects, right?
Neither does the devil.
Neither does the devil.
Right.
And yet, I mean, you're almost speaking, for lack of a better word, fatalistically.
Right.
Like
it is.
it will lead to.
No, it's a fatal disease. It's a fatal affliction.
Well, that's the theological confession, right? Of
And
sin.
therapeutic. In Alcoholics Anonymous, there's only 4 end games for addiction.
Okay.
You go crazy and you're institutionalized. You go to prison for crimes, you die. The 4th one is you get sober.
That's a pretty probably good.
And sobriety is
simple
is only an option once you say, I need help. So before you say I need help, you have 3 outcomes for what's happening to you right now. Down the road. And when you're in the midst of addiction, someone says you're either going to get crazy, in prison, or dead. You say, cool.
Yeah.
Because again, the addiction, the power of that spirit is saying they don't know you. Other people get arrested. Other people go crazy, but they don't know you. You're both hero and martyr. You're hero and martyr simultaneously in addiction.
So this is maybe not exactly the kind of addiction we usually talk about. It's not chemical, but the way that Israel was addicted to her kings and having a king like everybody else.
But it still creates a biochemical reaction in your brain.
Yeah. To the point where God finally just says, it demonstrates to them,
right?
You saw I told you what the end of this was going to be, and now you have it, and now you're going to Babylon.
This morning I woke up, had chapel. After chapel, I go onto social media to check my DMs. I get several DMs asking me a question. What do you think about this meme that Trump posted about this gold statue of him in Palestine?
Oh, gosh, right? Did you see it?
Well, I was forced to, because people are like, oh my God, have you seen this?
I was like,
number 1, he's a troll. He's a troll. Number 2,
he's
a narcissist. Yeah. And number 3, all politicians are antichrist, because they all claim to do something that only God can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why are you freaking out?
Yeah.
This is a biochemical, literally, right? Is that you have been conditioned to react, but you're not paying attention to as a physical change has actually happened to you.
Yeah.
And the emotions are the symptom.
Did you react that way when Nebuchadnezzar had built his statue?
Right. It's the same thing. it's the same thing. Right.
Yeah,
the difference being the Israelites knew what a false god was when they saw it.
I don't know if Trump knows the story, but
right. It doesn't matter, because even the ones who sent me that meme are Christians. And I'm saying, you're reacting in a way that is completely unbecoming for a Christian.
Like, how did Daniel and his friends react?
Right.
They prayed.
Yeah. They prayed, and then they went, his feet are going to fall apart, right? He's going to collapse.
Yeah.
He's doomed. That's how far removed we are from our own tradition, our own teachings.
Yeah, right.
Is that we're freaked out that another king says, hey, I should have a statue, versus, oh, I've seen this movie before. I know how it ends.
Right. And I know how to respond too.
Right.
Yeah, what the godly response is.
Yeah, you just mock it and go, that's funny.
We don't know. Were there other people other than Daniel or his 3 friends that responded that way? Don't know.
No, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. No.
Right. There are 7,000 prophets in Israel that you're not aware of.
Yeah, exactly.
But it doesn't matter. You look at it and go, yeah, I've seen this before. Whatever.
Right. But my other point was, what does God do to us when we become so dependent upon what is not from him?
Right.
Away we go. He devastates you.
Well, that's, again, if you're institutionalized or you're put in prison.
That's not the bottom for everybody, though.
It's not, but you're being taken away into slavery.
It is a kind of slavery.
And not everyone in Israel that went into slavery came home. Actually, most of them did not.
It's true. Not everybody who left Egypt made it into the promised land.
Right.
Actually, they all died.
I've done prison ministry to many people that never got clean and sober.
Yeah. And you don't know what the bottom would be, I guess.
Everybody's bottom is different.
Yeah.
Like I said, some people have to hit every tree branch on the way down. And some people stumble and go, oh.
By the way, then the reason I brought it up is the idea of hitting bottom and then rescue.
Right.
That is the narrative of the scripture.
Right.
It's death and resurrection.
Well, that's the psalm, right? I descend into the abyss and you're there.
Yeah.
To your point, I like saying that, of course.
My point.
In AA, I had a friend of mine. He tells a great story that I've never forgotten. He says, I was sitting in the county jail. I'm sitting on my cot. I'm staring up at this crack that ran from the ceiling along the wall. And it was like a 5-6 foot long crack. I'm staring at this crack and I'm thinking to myself, I can't believe I'm in jail. Like, I've ruined my life. My family's left me. I have no one to call to bail me out. And I'm going to jail. And so he said, I prayed right there. I said, God, if you get me out of this, I promise you I'll never use again. And in that moment, God revealed to him, this is the 3rd time you've prayed on this bed, staring at this crack in the wall, and said the exact same thing to me. And he goes, that's what it took to finally wake me up, to the fact that I'm an addict, that I wasn't even aware that I've been in this prison cell in this exact same situation 2 times previously
And had asked the same thing too.
and had prayed the exact same prayer. And God said, not yet, not
Hmm.
yet, now. And of course, 3 times and everything else. But that's then he got out of prison. He went immediately to a meeting. He didn't even go home. He went straight to an AA meeting and went, hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm an alcoholic. And here's my story. He went in front of the judge. He goes, Judge, I'm an alcoholic. I've been in the same jail cell 3 times in a row. And when I got out, I said, if you want to put me in jail, I deserve it. I'm not going to hide from it. But I promise you, if you give me parole, give me community service, I swear to you, you'll never see me again. Because now I know what was wrong the other 2 times I appeared in front of you. I was blind, but now I see.
Yeah.
That's what it
Although,
takes sometimes.
I can't help but think, because you mentioned the 3 times, St. Paul in 2 Corinthians with, 3 times I prayed that it be taken from me. And he said, no.
No, right.
My grace is sufficient.
That's the other side of addiction is, in a sense, you have to accept and acknowledge that even if you don't have the cravings anymore, the wolf is still in the woods. Just because you don't hear him howling anymore and just because you locked the door, the wolf is still out there.
And maybe that's the advantage of the biochemical conversation.
Sure.
Our brain pathways or the various
That
ways
too,
that's
right.
discussed. It's like, no, you've changed. You've been changed.
Right.
So it's
and you
not...
can change back, by the way.
Yeah.
Just as quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Why? Because we like it.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing I tell people. I haven't taken drugs outside of the ER since 1998. Opiates. And when I got that cocktail, when I was having my kidney stuff and I was dying from sepsis, and they gave me that, like I said, it was like, oh, I got this I remember this suit I used to wear all the time. It was in the back of the closet, and we dug it out, we put it back on, and it fits perfect. And what was interesting too was, because I wasn't a Christian when I was an addict, I was an atheist, but I was going through rehab as I was becoming a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
All of that was nostalgic when I was in the ER and I got the opiates, because now I'm a Christian, I'm a pastor, I'm talking to God in the midst of this, right? And it was fantastic, because what God did in that moment, I've talked about this before, is for 3.5 hours, I just talked to him, because I was isolated. It was during COVID, so they wouldn't let me be in another ward because I wouldn't wear a mask or anything, and I wasn't vaxxed. I talked to God for 3.5 hours, and he revealed to me why I'm an addict. And I'd never been able to come to that. Like, why am I an addict? That's actually where the name of the book comes from. He gave me that. He's like, because you're chasing an impossible prize. You're trying to get something that you can never have.
Again, and arguably, Paul doesn't help with that, like running the race,
right.
That picture.
Right. But I'm saying that even in the midst of, like, I'm dying and I need something for the pain. Mm-hmm. So give me the drugs. I take it. I'm taking it. I don't give a crap that I'm an addict. I need something because I'm dying. And that's what happens, though, is that even in the midst of the relapse, because that's really what I did, I relapsed. Even in the midst of that, God's like, no, you're mine. I'm not going to let you just wander back into drug addiction. Instead, I'm going to use this to actually reveal to you finally, after 50 years of life, this is why you're an addict. And now that it's open to me and I can see it, now I can write a book about it. Now I can talk with people about it, and I can name it and recognize, oh, this is the reason I keep playing her in front of the door.
Would you say you didn't know it before? It wasn't quite as...
I didn't know.
You didn't
know. I had an idea, but I didn't. I had the what, the how, the why kind of thing, but I didn't have the why. I'm sorry. I had the what, the how, the when,
but I think that's right, because I would ask you periodically, and you couldn't quite explain it.
Right.
Yeah. It just is.
That's like, I'm hunting. I know the game that I'm hunting, and I know that it lives in the woods here. I just don't know how to find it.
Well, so back to that theme of death and resurrection.
Right.
So with the relapse, I mean, it's a fake resurrection.
Correct. In reverse. It's a fake.
Because you're it actually, even though it's bringing death because it's painless.
Right.
Or it's reducing the pain anyway.
Right.
It's like I'm getting new life, but it's actually killing me.
Right. Because again, short term, you remember this? You're like, oh, I remember this. This is so good. This is why, by the way, to conclude the story,
I'm back. Yeah.
The second day after my surgery, I felt the voice came. You're in pain, right? You can feel it now, right? And that's when, again, the Holy Spirit said, you're drifting. And then when the nurse came in and said, it's time, I go, I don't want any more. Just give me Tylenol. She goes, why? I go, because I'm an opiate addict, and now I want it. The last 2 days, I didn't want it for pleasure. I wanted it because I was in so much
They didn't give you
pain.
the little button to push?
Yeah, and I had an unrestricted tap.
Oh my gosh.
So it wasn't like 3 per, it was like you hit it whenever
But that
you
wasn't
need
on your
it.
chart because it had been so long. I mean,
Right.
because that's the kind of thing you want to do. If you know you're an addict, like you got
Right.
to note it.
Well,
Make
no, I
sure it's
told
in your
them,
chart. You
like,
did.
I'm an opiate addict, but I'm like,
After they gave it to you or before?
before.
Oh.
And they're like, well, we can give you aspirin. I'm like, then give me the Dilaudid, because this is not like I'm gonna scream for the next 4 days. That's how much pain. And again, I'm in so much pain. I'm
And it was
screaming.
true. I mean, that's not.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I wasn't faking it. And if I get to the point where the pain is so bad that I'm saying like, give me the drugs,
Mm-hmm.
it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, but after 2 days, they still wanted to keep giving it to me because they kept me for 5 days after the surgery in the ICU. I'm like, just give me Tylenol. I'll take the pain. Because for me, and we talked about this in relation to like death too, is the pain reminded me of life, but it also reminded me of my need for God and prayer. And it also reminded me these drugs can't take away your pain. They can mask it, but the deeper pain that you're trying to deal with through drugs will never be gone, because that's the pain of living.
Maybe it was time to die.
And it was time to die, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when you walk into it, like when you're wheeled in and the doctor's like, hey, do you know you're 45 minutes away from death? And you're like, no, but thanks for telling me. He's like, yeah, we got to get you down there right now. Like, we don't have any time to mess around with this. You're like, oh, I'm dying. Like my body's shutting down, right? All my internal organs had shut down. And you're like, yeah, just give me anything to keep me alive. Because yeah, the drive to live is greater than anything. And then after that, on the other side of it, you're sitting there talking to God saying, okay, what's the deal? And he tells you this is the deal. And oh, by the way, you're starting to sniff at the door. Like you want to get outside. And he's like, you're like, oh, I think I'm in pain. He's like, if you say that, it's because you want it.
That's part of the problem with having high pain tolerance.
Yes, it is. Very much so.
But the inverse is also true. If you have a low pain tolerance, then you're more
so even after my second surgery, when I ended up going back to the ER with what they call phantom pain, sure enough, the nurse came in and she's like, yeah, we're just going to give you the cocktail. I'm like, whoa. Because I said my pain's 6 out of 10. She's like, anything over 4, we're giving you the cocktail. I'm like, could we not? Do you have anything lesser than like?
That is interesting.
Do you have anything between Tylenol? So they gave me Tylenol codeine,
and it can't just be like the economic advantage to dose you up.
No,
like
it's quality over quantity, or it's quantity over quality now. It's like it's both and, because they're like, you're in pain and we don't want you to be in pain, because if you're in pain's bad.
But I think there's a parallel broadly to culture. I observed this in the day school. That we don't have the option to discipline children the way that we used to. Never mind physical discipline, but just like, especially with spectrum people, who have IEPs or whatnot.
Right.
It's like you're powerless to do anything for them, and they know that, and they manipulate that.
Correct. Right.
So when you're in the hospital, like it seems like the ethic has become no pain ever.
Correct. It is, at least in my experience.
Yeah, and no noise.
Right.
And like pain avoidance is the main key, not necessarily healing, actually, just pain avoidance.
I've told people this since then, is if I needed to get high, I would never go to a drug dealer. I just go to the ER and go, ow, because I know they're going to load me up.
And you can't be alone in that. I'm sure others have
of course not.
Figured that out.
Of course.
So the point back then to being a theologian of the cross,
yes,
right, is that, well, where does God make himself most known to us?
In pain and suffering.
In pain and suffering, the thing that we keep trying to avoid in all these various ways.
And that's, again, fasting and chastity and celibacy is downstream of that, because you're self-sacrificing.
It is painful.
Right. Because you're giving away your passions.
Right.
And you're saying the purpose of life is for me to sacrifice myself for you, not to sacrifice for myself or to myself.
Do you know anybody personally that's done like a silence retreat? I think somebody was telling me they did this. Where they spent the weekend with like the Carthusians or somebody.
Well, I've done it in the past. I used to do it all the time after Easter.
Oh, you told me.
Yeah, okay. I do 3 or 4 days at Pochaman Terrace up in St. Francis.
Okay.
It's an Orthodox monastery.
Right. But I mean, talk about ultimate sensory deprivation. Yeah. I mean, you're praying.
But you're alone in the woods in a cabin by yourself.
So there's no prayer. There's no corporate prayer?
Nope. Well, you're free to join them.
Okay.
They tell you that when you like, hey, if you want to join us for chapel for meals, you're welcome to come to the main house. And I'm like,
you're still not talking.
Right. Right. But I'm like, no, I need to be alone. right? And all you hear is the gas lantern that you have in
My
the
problem is
bedroom.
I'd end up snacking a lot. So
They give you a basket of food to last you for the time you're there.
So you
So
have to
once it's
pace it
gone,
out.
you're
Okay.
gone.
Okay.
Yeah. Then
Yeah.
you're going to the main house. But yeah, they give you a loaf of bread, jug of water,
Okay.
some honey, some cheese, and that's all you get.
But
But I
mean,
like that because it also, what happens with this is, because you can do this at home too,
mhm.
is if you want to know how addicted you are to just eating for the sake of eating, stop eating for a while and let your body just feed off of its backup resources.
Yeah, it's called selective fasting.
Right. And just try that because, again, the average body mass in the United States is obesity anyways. So you have probably plenty of body fat.
You can
that
probably go for
feed
a
on
week without eating.
easily.
You might start seeing
Yeah.
things, but
Yeah.
because the
Well, that's good
ketones.
too, by the way. That's kind of what they did it for,
Yeah.
to release those chemicals. But
Right.
it's just recognizing that everything that comes toward us, we want to take a hold of that and make it into us, right? It's a part. That's what food is, right? Food comes from the outside in, and then we break it down in our bodies, and it becomes us.
Jesus says you expel it, though.
Well, there is that, but I'm saying, in a very practical way, you can say then that
You are what
hamburger
you
is
eat.
me.
Yes, you are. what
Literally,
you
like
eat.
that hamburger is me because I'm going to take that hamburger and it's going to rebuild my cells.
Yeah.
I've told people this. If all you eat is sugar, all of your brain cells are going to eventually
You'd be so
become
sweet.
sugar.
You're such a sweet person.
Again, short term versus long term. And we know that sugar causes cancer long term. That sugar weakens the walls of the cells, and
it feeds the cancer too.
It feeds the cancer.
Yeah.
So just practically, materialistically, science has proven what theologians have known for thousands of years, which is that the earthly embodiment of these spiritual influences are very real and either very positive or very detrimental.
On the flip side, if you mentioned Rhonda Patrick, and there's who are the other people I'm thinking of? What's the behavioral scientist guy, the sleep study guy? Huberman, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole cadre of people
Right.
who I would say
they're the new ascetics.
Well, yes, except it's become an idolatry for them. Like
Of course it has.
and it goes all the way to the extreme of the transhumanists,
right?
The guy injecting his son's blood and all that kind of stuff.
It has to.
Yeah. So it's like, then there's no middle ground. It's just like
no.
So even we try to flee addiction,
right,
and substitute it with some maybe positive practice.
When I started going to AA, I became obsessed with rock climbing. I was rock climbing 4 or 5 days a week.
Okay.
Then I got obsessed with endurance cycling, and I was doing 4 to 5 hours on the bike, right, every day. And then I got addicted to pumpkin bars, and I got, but it's not addiction. I got addicted to religion. I got addicted to theology because I'm going to seminary. Like all of these things became replacements for drugs because I still wasn't mature enough in the program. I wasn't deep enough into recovery to recognize, hey, you can replace bad things with seemingly good things that then become detrimental. And like going to church instead of going to the bar is great. However, if you're not addressing the root of your addiction, the spiritual side of addiction, church itself becomes an idol.
Well,
I've sat in AA groups with people who left church because they confused God with their church.
Okay.
And got addicted to church and then got burned because church is full of sinners. So they blame the congregation, the priest, a group at church, the denomination, the hierarchy, whatever it might be, but those aren't God.
Yeah. I was going to say that there is that other unfortunate modern trend. Maybe it's not modern, maybe it's ancient too, that people go to church for themselves.
Sure.
Which that could lead to an addictive kind of, or compulsive or obsessive kind of
well, of course,
practice. So, I mean, we don't overemphasize this, but we do make a point of like churches.
Well, you have the stylites, for example.
But you are a benefit to your neighbor.
That's the purpose of life, yes. And by the way, that's also the 12th step of AA.
Is it? Okay.
Having had a spiritual awakening, we sought to take the message of AA to others who suffer.
Oh, well,
community service is the end state of sobriety. Yeah.
So, I mean, we would say that faith leads to community.
Right.
Like you don't live for yourself alone.
Trusting in the program leads one to serving the community.
Yeah. And we don't have to talk about the history of AA and its
right. But I'm just saying
Christian roots.
Downstream from the congregation of saints, faith in Jesus Christ, all the language is there, all the behaviors, all the rituals and rites are there. All the symbols are there.
Yeah.
This is why people say, I wish church was more like an AA group or a sobriety meeting.
Because like where people were honest with each other?
Yes. Well, honest, but also supportive. Right.
Confess and forgive.
They're saying that downstream from the real thing, I'm actually getting more benefit from the facsimile than I am from the real thing itself. Which
That's
is always, and by the way, I spent an entire chapter dealing with the sacraments for those of you who are curious about the wine in the cup and so on.
Oh, good.
There's a whole chapter on that.
I mean, I assumed you would, but yeah.
That's for us as Lutherans, because we're sacramental, it's key for life, obviously.
Because Christ's word, yeah.
Right. Well, it's his blood. And would Christ ever tempt you to relapse? No, of course not. And since we're here, we might as well just read part 3 since it's not that long either, since we're talking about worship.
Yeah.
So part 3, how
I was
we
leading
worship
you to it.
addiction. Worship is the act of ascribing worth to something or someone. There, done. That's right. One sentence. I did it.
Crushed it.
Crushed it. Worship, I stole this obviously from somebody else. Worship is the act of ascribing worth to something or someone. It acknowledges that something or someone is worthy of our devotion and adoration. Whether or not we want to admit it, worship is fundamental to human nature, rooted in our desire to find meaning and purpose. In the Bible, there are 2 types of worship, true and false. True worship is ascribing worth to God, the one true God, the Almighty Father, worthy of all our devotion and adoration. False worship, on the other hand, is the act of ascribing worth to something or someone other than the one true God. This false worship is called idolatry, worshiping a false god, as it puts something or someone in the place of our Heavenly Father. We see an example of this when the Israelites did whatever is right in their hearts during the time of the judges. They turned from worshiping the Lord their God to genuflecting in reverence before the altars of Baals and Ashtaroth poles. This led them to engage in every spiritual and moral perversion imaginable. But that's the trajectory of false worship. False worship leads to disregarding the things that should be prioritized in life, including one's relationship with God, familial responsibilities, and social obligations. It quickly deviates from the divine order of things, which disrupts the harmony and balance intended by God. And ultimately, it is a spiritual betrayal that hinders individuals from living out their calling to love and serve God and their fellow human beings. There you go. I think I'm pretty much just going through the Large Catechism at this point.
Yeah. Sounds
and
familiar
rewriting
to me.
it.
Yeah.
But this is depicted then in Exodus 29 when Israel is forbidden from worshiping idols or other gods besides the one true God, because false worship will lead Israel to disregard the things that should be prioritized in life, such as their God, their families, friends, and responsibilities.
Repeated for emphasis.
Yes. Likewise, Jesus says in Matthew 6 that no one may serve 2 masters. Either they will hate the one and love the other, or they will be devoted to the one and despise the other. As he says to Israel in the wilderness, Jesus again tells his first century listeners that there is grave danger in trying to serve 2 masters, that is, 2 gods. So, one of the things that I also attempted to do in the book is to introduce people that aren't familiar with the Bible, because that's something I struggled with greatly when I first started asking the question of who is God? What is God? Where is God? How do I connect with this God? And the last, as I've talked about before, the last place that I was going to go is the Bible. Because for me, the Bible was simply the book that represented all the things that I hated about religion and about the people that subscribed to religion, especially
I appreciate
Christians.
You picking up on the, I guess we'll call them the archetypal or the
right
and the tropical kind of things.
Yeah.
You know, and also significant ones that are, I think, more well known to broadly to Christians. You're not like quoting some obscure passage from Leviticus or something.
Right. No. Because again, I want to introduce people, as I said on Kelsey's show, if I wrote this book again, I would make it more Nicene in the sense of creedal, in the sense of, yes, it's going to be Lutheran theologically, but I worry that opening up to the table of contents and seeing every chapter is Luther and It may cause some people to think, oh, this is just for Lutherans.
It's funny because I had the title
Yeah.
for this episode as Luther's definition, the title of the chapter,
Yeah.
and I changed it since then. I said, Our False Gods in Addiction. I
There
dropped
you go.
Luther from the
Right.
title.
Right.
So I was already on that move myself. I don't know that, mentioning Luther is really necessary.
In the sense, he's a conversation partner,
right,
that we can bounce these ideas off of and have this kind of ongoing theological conversation. But it is to say to people, even if you're not familiar with the whole Bible, I'm going to provide it to you in brief, in story form and narrative form to explain addiction, so that you can then go read the Bible for yourself, go read these passages for yourself, pray over them, think over them, see if I'm right in my illustration of addiction through
like
these.
the hat tip to Judges.
Right.
The book of Judges itself gives the summary right at the front end.
Yes.
It says, here's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. And so and as far as pattern of addiction, I suppose it's a wonderful allegory for the life of the addict back and forth.
It's establishing a pattern that, okay, from now on, your life will be biblical.
Right.
Your life will be theological, but not in a way that causes you to say, ugh, theology, but rather, no, here's extremely practical theology that we're drawing from these biblical examples.
But the examples you give, I think the other thing to note, with the exception of this Matthew 6 maybe, but even that Jesus is presenting in a narrative way.
Yeah.
So they're stories.
Right.
They're not just ideas.
Right.
Or even like proverbs, like wisdom.
Right.
Although I think we've neglected the wisdom literature, but that's a side note. Because what's the problem with the addict, which I'm sure you get to at some point, is that the story that you're telling yourself about yourself and about others, right? Or about this world or whatever.
I ask people that question now because of all my work the last 2 years is, so what's your story? And they always tell me about their addiction, the recovery. I go, well, that's nice, but what's the bigger story?
Yeah.
What's the story that identifies you as a person?
Yeah. Or
like, what's your identity? Because of course, if you're an addict, that's your identity. That's what defines you. When you're in recovery, that becomes your identity. That's what defines you. But those things are downstream from, no, your identity is child of God. Ultimately, that's who you are. That's who you're seeking after, is that relationship with God that's not God and me, but rather the Father, my Heavenly Father, Jesus is the Lamb of God, the Holy Spirit, the one who makes me a saint. This is the relationship I want to have. So I'm not going to say, I'm going to pray in the name of the big book, or I'm going to pray in the name of recovery, I'm going to pray in the name of my higher power, or even I'm going to pray to God. No, I'm going to pray in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, be more specific.
Right. And how can you do that if you first haven't been told, by the way, here's the story. Here's what you're now a part of, by the way. Versus instead of you're outside of this looking in going, how do I get in? How about if we just usher you in?
I think part of the other challenge you mentioned, faith here, and I can't help but think of, and baptismal identity.
Right.
How many addicts are baptized?
Right.
And that might actually be shocking to people, I imagine, because they would think, oh, well, the addict is the person outside the church, never been a part of the church.
Right.
Or it's like that it's possible to live a life in contradiction.
Right.
Where you have a conception of an identity that's explicitly contradicts your own baptism.
Right.
And that you can live that double life.
Right.
At the same time.
If you're walking into church on Sunday with your adult sippy cup of coffee, that's why I call them adult sippy cups, because that's what they are. Because the kids come in with their sippy cup of juice, and then the adults come in with their their tumbler, right, which is a sippy cup of coffee. Like, you brought a false god into my church, and you're going to sit in your pew unironically holding your God.
I put it in the sacristy. I don't put it.
That's right.
But
that's what I mean is we're not connected to a cosmology, to a tradition, to a culture that recognizes this is a God. And it may be a lesser benign God in the sense of it's just a cup of coffee, Pastor. I'm only going to have migraines if I don't drink it. Versus no one who's addicted to coffee says, I really like my coffee. What do they say? I just need my coffee. I can't function before. I can't adult
I really
without
like
my coffee.
My coffee.
Yeah, I really like it. And it's your fault.
Sorry.
But no, when people come to church, I'm like, what you got in your adult sippy cup there? Yeah, well, I just need my coffee. I'm like, oh, do you? You need it? That's interesting.
I don't think we have that many people that do that here. I guess I haven't actually paid attention.
I've got a handful.
Yeah.
But all the kids come in with their sippy cup, their little security blanket, and the adults do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
You know, why? I need it. No, you don't.
Get people to pull out their phone.
No, because I have signs on the door now.
Do you?
Yeah, it says turn off your phone before you walk into the nave.
I haven't had to do that.
Because, yes, because I'm the pastor who will stop if your phone goes off in church. I will stop and not continue until you shut your phone off.
This is also why I think I preferred the old days with the hymnal and the hymn board.
Yeah.
Instead of having all the other crutches.
Sure, because your hands are free.
Right.
Yeah.
And I some reason was conscious of somebody in the pew a week ago. They don't know who they are. They don't listen to the show, hopefully. You know, that during the sermon
we know who you are, Carol.
Spending the whole time Karen, paging through the announcements.
Sure.
I'm like, just listen.
Right.
Like what do you can't just take those home. You can
We're
look at them
afraid to
later.
be alone with our thoughts and our feelings. We've been taught
alone,
to be
or like you said a long time ago on this episode,
yeah.
To be alone with God.
Right.
Or to be before him face to face.
Right, 100%.
Yeah, faced up to God.
And so, yes, Ian and I have hymnals. We use hymnals, but yet you'll see people with their phone in their hand because they've memorized the order of service. So they're like, as long as it's not a hymn, I can flip my phone out. But they don't do it maliciously.
They don't even know. No.
They do it habitually. Like, again, I'm going to step out and have a cigarette and I'll be right back. It's the same process. And like I have Caitlin, I'm like, put your phone away, Caitlin. You look like a croissant. It's like, or I just say, hey, get off the altar and engage. Right. And I say it because we're friends and I love her, but at the same time, I'm deadly serious. And she knows I am because we've talked about it. It's like, you have a problem.
This remember back in the day with I knew I had this growing up. The pastor would go out for a smoke during the sermon hymn before the sermon.
Nice. Good man. I like that.
I guess. I mean, a little nicotine before the get up there to preach.
Just level things off a little bit. But yeah, it's the same thing, right? It's like in the midst of the divine service, I'm going to have to go out and give a nod to the old pagans.
Well, supposedly this is like the hymn that's going to teach what you're going to be preaching. And then you're just like, I need a break.
Yeah, you need to step out. I like that. It's like halftime. Commercial break.
And I think some of them are pipe smokers too. It's like, for
sure.
Maybe that's why we had the 15 stanza hymns. Enough time to pack the bowl.
There you go. Yeah. I would love if people smoked pipes in church, though.
Why didn't they that's what I always wonder. It's like, look, if you're going to light it up, just do it right there.
I used to, but then my custodian got mad at me because the church smelled like pipe smoke.
Okay.
I'm like, yeah, it smells good. It smells better than mildew.
We started, at your encouragement, we started to use frankincense during our prayers at night.
Yay.
Yeah.
Good.
And a couple times I've just forgotten, I just leave it running. And it's like, did you forget to put it out? Yeah, I did. Oh, yeah, because it's so good.
There's no putting it out. It goes out when it goes out.
Burn it all.
That's right.
Okay.
So in the same way, the addict will eventually try to serve both their addiction and their desire for a healthy, fulfilling life. But ultimately, the addiction will win out, and the addict will be consumed by it. But this idol is very cunning and deceitful. So the object of worship for the addict can take many forms, such as drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, or food. But regardless of the form it takes, addiction is always a powerful force that has a devastating impact on the addict's life. Addiction will lead to spiritual, physical, psychological, and social problems as the addict becomes increasingly isolated and disconnected from the people and activities that once gave their life meaning and purpose. So, this approach to understanding worship can provide a useful framework for understanding addiction and its impact on the addict's life. At its roots, addiction is a form of false worship, as the addict is worshiping a false god. The object of addiction takes the place of God in the addict's life, and the pursuit of pleasure or relief becomes the central focus of their life. Their false worship then violates the command against false gods, because the addict has put something or someone in the place of the true God. On the other hand, true worship involves acknowledging that the true God is a God of grace and mercy. He is the source of all value and worth in life. Thus, to overcome addiction as a form of false worship, it is necessary to replace the false god of addiction with the true God who reveals himself to sinners on the cross of Jesus Christ. Afterward, he enriches them by leading them into meditation on his words in the Bible, prayer, and attending religious worship services to hear his preachers declare the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ, which unconditionally forgives sinners. Again, we quickly see that the spiritual component of addiction recovery is essential for overcoming addiction as a form of false worship. It is only by replacing the false god of addiction with the true God who is revealed in Jesus Christ that the addict can find lasting freedom from their slavery to addiction. The Apostle Paul writes in Romans 6, "Do you not know that if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one whom you obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness?" This verse warns us that when we obey something or someone other than the God who forgives sinners, we become enslaved to them. In addiction, the individual becomes a slave to their substance or behavior, unable to resist the urge to engage in it, even when it is harmful to themselves and others. With this in mind, we must admit that overcoming addiction is not easy. Addiction is a chronic physical, mental, and spiritual disease that requires ongoing support and management. Recovery then is a holistic process involving mind, body, and soul. And as difficult as it may be to accept when it occurs, relapse is a common part of that process. However, by understanding addiction as a form of false worship and addressing all of its components, beginning with the individual's relationship with God, it is possible to achieve lasting freedom from addiction. But there are still challenges, even after the addict receives freedom from addiction through faith in Jesus Christ and participation in a program of recovery. One of the key challenges in addressing addiction as a form of false worship is restraining the stigma and shame that is often associated with addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Addicts are frequently seen as weak or immoral, and the shame associated with addiction can prevent addicts from seeking help. However, it is important to understand that addiction is a spiritual disease that results in harmful, immoral choices. Like any other disease, it requires treatment and support. Still, since at its root it is a spiritual affliction, it requires constantly hearing the forgiveness of sins preached in Jesus' name and being shown sympathy and compassion by others. Another challenge in addressing addiction as a form of false worship is the lack of theological resources and person-to-person support available to addicts in so many churches. Addiction treatment can be expensive, and many addicts lack access to affordable treatment options. This is where congregational resources, such as pastoral care, support groups that focus on addiction's theological and social components, and sober environments grounded in grace and mercy can be helpful. This is all to say that addressing addiction as a form of false worship requires a shift in our theological and societal attitudes towards addiction. Instead of seeing addiction as unforgivable or as nothing more than a moral failure, we must recognize it as a spiritual disease that requires forgiveness and compassion, and a physical and psychological disease that needs treatment and support. This is why we must recognize the spiritual component of addiction and the importance of replacing the false god of addiction with the true God revealed in Jesus Christ's life, death, and resurrection, so that the whole person is addressed, receiving help for their body, mind, and soul. Finally, to fully understand addiction as a form of false worship, it is also important to consider the role of the self in addiction. Whether we want to confront this truth or not, the self is at the center of worship. In true worship, the self is directed towards God and finds its true identity and purpose concerning God. However, in false worship, the self becomes the center of worship and seeks to find its identity and purpose in the false God. This dynamic is abundantly apparent in addiction, where the addict becomes so consumed with the pursuit of pleasure or relief that their own identity and purpose become tied up in the object of addiction. They may begin to see themselves as a drinker or drug user, rather than as unique individuals, creatures of God gifted by Him with strengths, weaknesses, and inherent value. As the Apostle John warned in 1 John 2, for all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, and the desires of the eyes, and pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. So there is always a temptation for the addict to indulge in physical pleasures and desires, which leads to further harmful behavior. In addiction, the addict is driven by not only a physical desire for pleasure, but relief from pain, leading them to engage in behaviors that are harmful to themselves and others. So, overcoming addiction as a form of false worship requires a shift in the addict's understanding of themselves and their relationship to God and the world. This involves developing a sense of self worth and purpose, grounded in a relationship with Jesus Christ, specifically the forgiveness of sins pronounced in His name, and the mutual consolation and comfort of other believers. It also involves addressing the underlying psychological and social factors that contribute to the addict's sense of identity and purpose. This will also help the addict appreciate that false gods and false worship have deceived them, leading them to develop habits that locate their piety and devotion in what has been killing them, and to shift their allegiances from what is false and deadly to what is true and vital.
Okay. So there you're making that emphasis at the end on the community,
Right.
but you also criticized the community a little bit, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
With the key challenges.
Right.
What was the first one here? Was the
resources, lack
uh,
thereof.
no, you said stigma and shame was
Oh,
the
that
first
part,
one.
yes.
Yeah, stigma and shame associated with addiction.
Right.
I think we know this inherently with pornography addiction.
Sure.
Maybe not as much with alcohol here because so many
Right.
people use alcohol.
Mhm.
You know, actually,
Or
tell you,
pharmaceutical addiction.
well, that would be another one. There probably is
Yes.
a stigma still for that.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No, I think it's socially acceptable to be
The
zonked out of your
pornography one,
brain on 3 or 4 prescriptions.
I've talked to the men about this. I said,
Right.
um, many of us need help, and we're not comfortable saying it.
Of course not.
Right. So how can you overcome the stigma and the shame?
Right.
It's like, I mean, the first thing is you're not going to be excluded from this community because of this.
But it has to be said explicitly by the leaders.
Yeah. I experienced this just recently, in a way that, was profound. And saying like, I don't think I could ever say that because I could never go to church again there. And you're like,
Mhm.
well, so what sin can the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit will exclude you from
Right.
Christ, right? That's what
Right.
He says. So
Mhm.
why would we exclude you? I could understand, like, maybe you can't, there's other people there that you are in
Sure.
relationship with that now you've hurt and harmed,
Sure.
and that's revealed. And so then,
Mhm.
yeah, maybe you do need to seek another Christian congregation that can,
But that comes
that's
after.
downstream. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And so, yeah, the shame and stigma, I think, has to be named in the pulpit. It has to be named in classes. It has to be talked about openly and honestly.
Not just the negative of like, this is
No,
sin,
the
but
holistic approach to it,
there
which
is
is
forgiveness.
we're not addressing the shame and the stuff and the moral failings are all consequences of addiction, not what lead to it.
Okay.
But also recognizing that you're not addressing the spiritual component. You're not thinking like theologians. You're thinking like therapists. You're thinking like moralists. And we have
Right.
to, again, as I've said on podcasts and in person, if you wake up and you're drunk or high and your first thought is, I should be in church, go to church.
Yeah.
I don't care if you're drunk, come to church.
Right.
I don't care if you're high, come to church and get sober in church.
Yeah. No, I think, I mean, there's probably two reasons for this. One, because of the therapeutic aspect of it, people think
Right.
they have to overcome things themselves,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so much now is self-medicating,
Right.
or self-therapizing,
Yeah.
or I mean, you could even do telemedicine. I mean, people do telemedicine, which is also very impersonal, even though there might be a person on the other side of the screen, so that they don't think that there can be healing in community.
Right.
Is that because you've probably heard people say this, like, well, I'm going to get my life in order and then I'll be back in church. And
right.
Like, what? No, church, then God puts your life back in order. I mean, that's first absolution, please. Right. I mean, so that's that. And then I wondered about the other theological and in-person support. Have you,
Right.
do you have any personal experience with Celebrate Recovery?
Mm-hmm.
For me, I distrust it.
I'm not a big fan.
Because I know the tradition it comes out of.
Correct. It's not sacramental.
It's not sacramental.
Right.
Even if it's coupled with like a worship experience, as they would call it.
Yeah.
That's the first problem. It also doesn't take the bondage of the will into account.
Correct. Right.
Or that we're actually sinners.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Because we had a Celebrate Recovery outfit right around the corner from me. That church had a billboard that I can never forget. It quoted Mark something, but it didn't actually have the quote. It just said Mark something. It said, "We're all a little messed up, but we're working on it."
Right.
That was the billboard out in front of the church. I'm like,
right.
Well, if that's what Celebrate Recovery is too,
right.
Like, that's not taking any of this.
Well, it's a therapeutic framing of sin,
right?
Versus just an honest statement. Yeah, you're selfish. That's what it means.
So, I mean, what resources do we use? I mean, do we have none? See, that's my problem. Okay.
Which is why you buy my book. Because go ahead and try to find another book on recovery and addiction that deals with the sacramental side of things. Find it and send it to me.
They may say go to church in kind of an abstract way, but that's not what we're talking about.
No, it's we have to reframe our language so that we recognize go to church is kind of an empty statement, like saying you should pick up the garbage, versus when you go home because that's a place that you're safe at. It's a place where your family is going to receive you and they're going to take care of you. They're going to feed you. They're going to love you. So when I say come to church, what I really mean is come to God's house. Yeah. So say that. You need to come to God's house because you're a child of God.
So what I had is I had an addict, and I did send him to Celebrate Recovery.
Yeah.
But then our Saturday evening service was right afterwards.
Right.
During their worship time that followed it. So he'd just come over and then have the come over and have the sacrament.
Right.
And he's sober today still. So
right.
I guess that's commendable in its own way. Although he was always kind of, what do you want to say? He wasn't praising Celebrate Recovery.
Right.
He just, it was a group setting and you got to be honest. So, that was helpful.
If it's a resource that works for you, good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also recognize, I would argue again, that without the medicine of immortality, without the blood of Christ, which heals all wounds, you're again downstream. And
well, I think it's even farther, or it's deeper than that, because again, thinking of that context that I had, their worship was self-centered.
Correct.
It wasn't. I mean, yes, you'd speak abstractly of God.
I mean, you're facing the right direction, but you're also depriving yourself of the true source of your peace and comfort.
But they didn't have even the same theology of worship, where God serves us, and gives us.
That's what I'm saying.
Gifts.
You're facing up the mountain. You're looking up the mountain. You're looking for Jesus. You're looking towards Jesus. But again, it's not going to materialize for you in the way that he presents himself, in the water, in the word, in the bread, body.
That's what you meant by sacramental.
Yeah. And even within the context of the congregation of saints is, why are we here? Well, we're here to receive the body and blood of Christ. Okay, there we go.
Yeah. And what does that do? That reconciles us to God and to one another.
Right. Hence from communion. Him to us, from us to each other, versus from us to him, back to us, back to each other, back to him, back to us.
Right.
Kind of becomes circular. No, I think that ultimately, at least in my experience, both for myself personally, because the next section is on piety, for those of you who are curious.
Okay.
The chalice was the thing for me. Like, it's the thing that finally let go of my addiction and say, I'm trusting thee, Lord Jesus. I'm trusting only thee, because I'm drinking wine and I'm an alcoholic. So if you're not
doing it with other people.
Yeah, and I'm drinking it in front of other people who know I'm an addict. Yeah. So here we go. I'm trusting versus, well, I trust myself not to slip. I don't actually.
No.
Because I've been down that road and I have. So
That's like forgiving yourself, right? It's kind of
sure,
as
yeah, for
nonsensical
sure
as
it is,
that.
because that's what you're receiving. So
Mm-hmm.
when other people come to church and they're asking me the same question that I had asked my pastor at the time, I'm telling them, I promise you, and I'm not only staking my ministry and my word on what I'm about to say to you, but I'm actually staking your life on what I'm about to say to you. So this is no small thing. I promise that when you drink from the cup, you will not be tempted to relapse. I promise you that. And they're saying, you're promising me that. You're guaranteeing it. I go, yes, I am. Because this is the blood of Christ.
The confidence of Jesus.
He would never, ever tempt you to relapse.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not to say that the devil and his angels wouldn't do that.
Right.
But I'm saying at this altar, you will never be tempted to relapse, and you will never be given the strength to do it. Because as a pastor, for example, I'm alone in church right now. I could go into the vestry and start chugging wine, and no one would know.
Mm-hmm.
I could sleep it off here too. I have no desire to do that, ever. So is that because of the fact that I don't like, our communion wine? No, I love our communion wine. It's fantastic. People come to church here for our wine. But it's because I have no desire for it. Well, how is that possible if I'm an addict? Well, it's not me. I can tell you that much. And we've talked about this in the past with the fact that we don't believe in actual healings anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And yet when people ask me how I got clean and sober, I say, well, God made me sober. He took away the cravings. He healed me. People go, yeah, but I mean, you went to rehab and stuff. I'm like, no, I didn't. I went into the desert for about a year and did that. But I came back from that experience as a missionary and I relapsed in Portland. And then I relapsed a second time in Portland, and then came back to Minnesota from Portland and relapsed again. And then I went to AA after my third relapse. Yeah. And you recognize, again,
many little deaths then.
The first step of AA is admitting that you're powerless over alcohol and your life has become unmanageable. And then the second step is that only a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sobriety, parentheses, and sanity.
And not to make it a little of what you just said, but I mean, that is the confession of sin.
Yes, it is.
All sin.
Well, that's because the 12 steps came out of the Oxford movement, and the Oxford movement was started by a Methodist and a Pietist Lutheran.
There you go.
So yes, it should sound eerily familiar to Lutherans because he took it from the catechisms.
But not all sin is addiction. I mean, all addiction is sin, but is all sin addiction? I don't think it works both ways.
I do, because
I'm
sin leads
guessing
to
it
coveting,
does.
and coveting is your heart attaching its fear, love, and trust to something.
So, I mean, you've broadened the definition of addiction far beyond what the medical community
Correct.
has. Yeah,
you have to, because they're not seeing it because
they're not taking it as seriously then,
they're godless.
in a way, right?
Right.
They're like, no, this is a captivity to passions, desires, lusts, and also then the whole confession of what the flesh is according to
you
Paul.
simply have to replace one thing with another thing. It's like, this is true. You do have to replace this with that. However,
my heart with a heart of flesh.
Right.
My
well, I'm not going to get drunk
spirit
anymore. I'm going to go to a book club. Great. Now you're addicted to your book club. So where does it stop? Where does the cycle end? It ends with the absolution.
Yeah.
You have to find someone who has a word or words that are so powerful and evocative that once they're said, you don't want to do that thing anymore. And in my 53 years of life, I've not found that person.
Yeah.
Right. And as a consequence, I go back to the word and I pray and I go, okay, where are you going to give me my solace? I got to go back to the font. I got to go back to the chalice. I got to go back to the gospel.
Yeah. This is what I love about the formal individual absolution. Where have I sent? I've how does it go? I just lost it now.
I've sinned against you in thought, word, and deed.
No. I know that one. No, as if I mattered most.
Yes, right.
Right, but just the confession of the self-idolatry.
Right.
That all idolatry begins in the heart.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so at some point, I would argue that you have to cross the street and you have to say, okay, I'm going to go into God's house and I'm going to ask God, how can I get this monkey off my back? Because I'm going and doing my program. I'm surrounding myself with other sober people. I'm living a good life. I'm financially responsible, etc. However, and this is, again, the sidebar is, I did a lot of stuff to myself and other people when I was using. And if people really knew the depths of what I did and why I did it, I don't think they would look at me the same way. This goes back to your guilt and shame and so on.
Yeah, even now.
I can't talk to people about what I did. here. In AA, I can do a 5th step with somebody or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't do it here, because if I admitted what I actually did, not only would you not be able to forgive me, but God wouldn't forgive me.
Mm.
And it's like, well, God was with you when you were doing it. How
Mm.
do you think you ended up here and not dead?
This is why I loved going through Ezekiel, and when
Mm-hmm.
he describes the 2 women, which
Yeah.
is Israel and Samaria,
Yeah,
and it's scandalous
for sure.
what the way that they what do we say, abuse themselves, I guess
Right.
is the way to put it.
And I think to go that direction, people in addiction have to understand that they're going through a Jonah kind of experience.
Mm-hmm.
That when you're in the belly of the whale, the belly of the beast, as it's often called, actually, it's not a beast. You're in the belly of God. You're actually in death itself.
He's digesting you, and he's going to
He is
spit you out
digesting
alive.
you, and he's about to spit you out. And yeah, you can be angry about that, and you can sit under the tree and say, I'd rather die, but here we are.
Yeah.
And again, on the therapeutic side of the house, you're being told to go spread the message of sobriety to others that suffer and struggle. But on the theological side of the house, I need to tell you about this guy who just exorcised all these demons from me. And what does Jesus say? He doesn't say, follow me. He says, go home. Go home. Go live your life. Well, the demoniac goes to the Decapolis and preaches to everybody he meets.
Right.
The woman at the well goes home and goes, I got to tell you this.
Yeah, he knew everything about me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Over and over again in the Gospels, we encounter these people. And just from an interaction with Jesus and how he sets them free from whatever burden they're carrying, he says, you can't carry this burden anymore. This is a godless burden. So I'm going to give you a new burden that's godly and it's light and it's easy. And you're going to go tell people about this. And it doesn't, again, set you free from your neighbor. It sets you free to live and serve your neighbor, whoever that might be. And that's the destructive power of addiction is I'm not only not going to serve anybody except myself, but in the end, I'm going to annihilate myself to escape the pain, the regret, whatever, the shame, the guilt, everything that comes with it.
They can't possibly see that how God could use any of that for their
Right.
good and for
Well, it's because no one's
good.
told them.
Right.
Or they have been told, but they can't hear because the voice in their ear is, don't listen to that guy. He's a moron. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Well, and I can see it. It was too painful. It's too difficult. It's it hurts too much.
We're not considering the presence of the Luciferian and the demonic and the spiritual. That's the problem. So that you can say to someone, clear as day, well, the whole reason that you were this way is because you were possessed. It was hard for me when a friend said that to me about himself and the light went off. Again, God's like, he's talking about you. Because I never thought of it in those terms of like, I was being possessed by an evil spirit. But then I go back and I go, why would I do all these things? Like, I always reflect on in the midst of my addiction when I was at my worst, and I'd be sitting outside at this coffee shop and I'd see women walking their babies in strollers. And I'd want to interact with them because I thought that was just the sweetest, most beautiful thing. But then if I said hello as they went by, they would literally like veer away from my area because they'd see me and I'd be like, and I'd feel
and that maternal instinct kicks in.
Right. And you're like, but I'm not a threat. Like I'm thinking like, why?
They know it.
But they can see me and they know I'm a threat. I can't see me. I can't see who I am. It's like I always tell the story, right? When a girlfriend took me to church with them, I'm like, well, I'll just spray cologne on myself and no one will know. I'll have some chewing gum. And the only person in church who didn't know was me. Everyone knew. I looked like a zombie. I smelled like death warmed over and I hadn't showered and hadn't washed my clothes and smelled like any number of substances that were still on my body. The only person that was fooled was me. And yet that my girlfriend's pastor dad invited me for dinner, thanked me for always watching out for his girls and really appreciated that I was their friend. Then after I went to see him after I was, searching, he's like, "Oh yeah, it was hard. We were praying for you a lot. But we trusted that God was bringing you to church and he brought you into my daughter's lives and I knew they were going to minister to you in whatever way. And that in those moments when I had that opportunity to minister to you, I took it. But I knew that if I pushed you hard, you wouldn't come back. And look where we're at."
Yeah.
And again, when you're in the midst of it, yeah, all you're thinking of is I'm in the guts of a fish.
So, I mean, this is also part of the dichotomy. You've talked about it both ways, that on the one hand, go to church, right? You tell the addict, go to church. On the other hand, it's going to take an external word to get them to church.
Right.
So others are going to say, come to church.
Right? You have to.
So that the external proclamation, so that you who've been absolved, this is the way I've communicated it to people, and it applies to this topic as much as any, is like absolve other people.
Right.
Like say, I forgive you.
Right.
And they'll be like, why, how could you even say that? And like, let me tell you about Jesus, right? I mean, that's your opening.
Right.
Is to be honest and real with people and absolve in Jesus' name in a way that they're not going to get from anyone else.
Right. I talked about this on my podcast last week, this very specific topic, that the dynamic of the world, the dynamic that is perpetuated generation to generation, is the victim-perpetrator dynamic. And within that dynamic, there is no forgiveness. There is no grace. So politicians, celebrities, professional athletes, cultural influencers, right on down to your own interpersonal relationships, they're founded on a dynamic of one of us is the victim in this situation and one of us is the perpetrator. And because I'm the victim, I don't have to forgive you. I have to retaliate, which then turns you into the victim of my retaliation, which creates this kind of bloodless blood feud, this cycle of violence that the world thrives on. And of course, you have to ask who is the prince of this world, who's in charge. And so, as hard as it is, even for Christians to admit this, the way to overcome tyrants, the way to overcome the world, the way to defeat Satan is to say to that politician that you hate because you blame him or her for ruining your life, or the boss, or that celebrity that you used to just love their movies,
or the abuser,
you have to say, I forgive you in the name of Jesus Christ. Because what got him killed? He forgave sinners.
Yeah.
That's how you break, that's how old this dynamic of victim and perpetrator is.
Yeah.
And so it sucks. I'll be the first to admit it. I've had to forgive people and I didn't want to.
Yeah.
And again, forgiveness doesn't mean that you trust them. It doesn't mean you're going to reconcile. It means I recognize the log in my eye and the sliver in yours, and that I hate you or I despise you. But as he says, be angry, but do not sin, is recognizing if I hate this person, even though I don't even know them, let's say.
Yeah.
Why do I hate someone who I don't know? Well, because my life is negatively affected by their choices. Okay, forgive them and move on.
Whose problem is it?
Right. Yeah, it sounds like a you problem, right? Versus I know this person, problem. I was married to this person, I was working with this person, they were a teammate, whatever it might be. They did something that I took offense at, or they hurt me, whether physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, the priest, whatever. Forgive them, kick the dust off your feet if necessary, because they don't want to reconcile with you. Kick the dust off your feet, turn them over to God's care, bless them, and move on.
Right.
Because as Jesus says, this is how we pour coals of judgment upon their head. But it's the most counterintuitive, counter-worldly, countercultural thing that you could possibly do today, which is, as you said, not only to receive forgiveness, recognizing the log in your eye, but then forgiving others as you have been forgiven. And then some will say, out of curiosity, why would you do that?
And why do I need
because
that?
I'm forgiven.
Yeah.
And if you really knew my heart, the dark secrets, the dark corners, you wouldn't be surprised that I forgave you. But we don't function that way.
You could just call it a sobriety program.
Well, I do that at church during announcements every once in a while. I say, we're going to have a sobriety check real quick.
Yeah.
Usually before the annual meeting, just say, here's our sobriety check. I'm going to confess to you right now and ask for your forgiveness.
Right.
And here's the things that I'm aware of.
Right. Yeah. And that way they're very similar.
Yeah. But it is so easy to go from, I just confessed, and then patting yourself on the back for that.
Yeah.
To, well, that was last week or last year, or, well, that was different, versus, again, reading the early fathers has been so therapeutic for me, cathartic, I guess is the better word, because they're about this constantly. They just can't get off the subject of the plank in your eye and the forgiveness of others and loving people, even though they're sinning.
Even if they're not necessarily calling it addiction.
Right.
Right. Really addiction then becomes, I guess, a framework or a paradigm to understand.
We call it unrepentant sin.
The way that unrepentant sin works its way out, trying to live apart from God.
Right. In modern terms, unrepentant sin would be habitual wrongdoing or habitual self-damage or habitual hurting of others.
And the drugs help.
They help because they dull the conscience.
Right. Right.
Both in the modern sense of conscience and in the pre-modern sense. You dull your relationship with God and the whole question of
Or
God.
whatever gives you the hormonal kick or
Exactly. And
whatever
then
it
you
is.
dull
Yeah.
your sense of right and wrong and moral
Mhm.
good and bad and go, I got to figure a way to get over this.
But it makes me feel good.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is, I've talked about this in the sense of when a child lies for the first time,
Mm.
if you're keen to this, you recognize they just lied to you because the lights go off in their eyes. Because they realize, oh, I just did a thing. I like hacked the system. And after that first lie, your child will continue to lie to you because they see it as a shortcut. They see it as a hack. And you really have to think seriously then about, well, why would you choose to lie to me when you love me, you trust me, you never, you don't even want me to be disappointed in you. And yet you know that you just lied to me and I know you just lied. And I gave you an out and you doubled down. It's because of that sense of power, that awakening of, ooh,
You enjoyed it. Yeah, you enjoyed
right?
it. Yeah.
I can't physically overpower this adult. I can't not do what they tell me to do because they're bigger than I am and I'm dependent upon them. But I just said something and I got away with it.
Yeah. I was talking to someone about a similar practice. One of my favorites. It's called procrastination.
Yeah.
Which is the inverse of delayed gratification.
Right.
So you delay making or taking action or making a judgment or whatnot, because the pleasure of not making the decision
Exactly
is greater than the pain of doing it.
Complaining is the upper Midwestern version of I'm going to do something without doing anything.
Right.
I complained, therefore I did something.
And it's just, to me, it does parallel then addiction in a way, because you're like, well, it's going to hurt more when you finally have to make the decision, but you don't care.
Well, that's the point too, is at the point where you say, or you realize, oh, like I can't quit, or I don't want to quit anymore, or it's ruining my life. Quitting is more painful than just continuing on the road that you're on.
Right.
There's a kind of terminal velocity to it.
Even if you know it leads to death, it doesn't.
You don't care anymore.
It doesn't.
You
matter.
don't care.
Yeah.
You're used up. You're done. And that fatalism you referred to is front and center.
Yeah.
Because you realize, oh, I didn't realize this is where this is supposed to end up. I saw it over and over again. I've watched all the true VH1 True Hollywood Stories kinds of things. But I said, the voice in my ear went, but it's never going to happen to you. You're different. You're the hero of the story. This is what happens to other people.
It'll be just like in Top Gun 2.
Sure. Right.
You'll go and then boom, you come up at the very end.
Oh, look, that's not going to be fine.
I made it. Yeah, I'll pull out.
I mean, my grandpas, my uncles, my family members, my friends, they all were taken by it, but not me. Yeah. As I've said before, we were sitting in AA one morning when I lived in Stillwater, and someone across from me was sharing his story, and I had to suppress my laughter because he was basically telling my story, but it was him.
Yeah.
And I leaned over to my friend and I said to her, I go, oh, I am such a cliche. And then she leans over and goes, we're all cliches. That's why we're here. That's why we share our experience, strength, and hope with each other, because we all do the same crap.
I'm a unique.
There's only 10 ways to sin.
I'm a unique flower. I'm so unique.
And most of 9 of those ways of sinning are all just a consequence of the first one.
It's a pretty good summary. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you shouldn't be surprised when you discover that, oh, I'm not special. I'm not a snowflake.
I'm not a snowflake. Yeah.
I'm not going to escape this. But we all say that. Every addict I've ever met has said, but not me. I'm different. Right? But every sinner says that.
Right. If that's
God couldn't possibly forgive me.
There's your blindness. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it goes both directions. In the direction of grace and mercy, not me. But in the direction of self-destruction and annihilation, not me.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm different. Everyone who's ever been burned has said at some point in playing with the fire, I'm being careful. I'm safe. It's not going to happen to me. Again, it's progressive though. You start off with a match and then all of a sudden you got a can of gasoline and a blowtorch.
Yeah.
Pot kettle,
or not pot kettle, frog kettle.
Yeah.
Frog pot. Yeah.
That's always the problem then, is that
slow boil.
Right. And so, yeah, do you want to end there or you want to read the...
No, that's good.
Okay, good. Second chapter is on the bondage of the will and the symbol. What else do I have in here? Bondage of the will, theology of the cross, symbol used to set peccator, and then election and the sacraments.
I didn't expect any of that.
I know, right? What a shocking revelation that Don would write about these topics.
Those would be the topics.
And I'm just spitballing here.
And that they would apply to addiction, huh?
And then the symbol and addiction is vocation mainly. Is asking the question, because I think for those who maybe have left the church because of their addiction and are reluctant to come back or don't want to come back at
There's
all,
no place for them. Yeah.
or those who have never been in the church, it's the question of, okay, what can you expect and what should you expect?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think too that churches should be held accountable by people who are coming in, whether they're still addicts or in recovery, or people again who are going to Al-Anon or Narcanon, where they're
Mm-hmm.
friends and family of addicts. I think you should walk into a church and say, "Listen, I have an expectation here, which is dot dot dot." Right? I read Riley's book. I'm looking for this. Do you have this or not? Because your sobriety is on the line. This is
Yeah.
like, for many people, maybe it's just a part of their schedule and it's just something they do. And for others, obviously it's non-negotiable. I go to church every Sunday. I need this. But for the addict, the question is, if I come here and I relapse because of this, like you actually have a negative effect on my sobriety, why would I stay? Well, I would say then you shouldn't go there in the first place. Like, don't open the door to that.
It's an interesting way to kind of diagnose, are
Right.
we doing the Lord's work or not?
It's like I've said to people who have asked, well, I'm going to different churches, I'm church shopping or whatever, and I go, do you know what to look for though?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you have a checklist of worship? And I help them with that. I'm like, these are the things that I would urge you to look at.
And you're using that framework of sobriety. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Well, we
If I
can't
walk
help
into your church and you don't have the sacrament, or you're telling me it's not the body and blood of Christ,
it.
or I'm walking in your church and you're not able within the polity of your church to receive addicts, I'm not attending your church. Why would I?
Yeah.
You can't minister to me. And this, by the way, isn't like you have to have a very specific, unique ministry to addicts. I mean, the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is physically there in the words water, bread, and wine.
Well, I guess we've asked this question about other things too, like teenage pregnancy or,
Right.
I mean, what sin could exclude you from the grace of God?
Nothing.
Right.
Absolution makes you a virgin all over again.
Well, I read from Hebrews 12 last night, actually. It was last night, Wednesday, whatever. I think it was. It was really incredible. Like, you can speak against the Son of God and be forgiven.
Right.
Like, what? But you can't speak against the work of the Holy Spirit. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's like, so how have you sinned against God that he can't forgive you?
Right.
But we're always, maybe it's the purity cult.
Sure.
And then also like cultural purity. We have that
Yeah.
as like a cultural thing. Like, we need to get our
Right.
country in line again or something like that.
I would go so far as to say, when you walk into a church and you encounter a greeter or the priest or whatever comes and talks to you and says, hey, you can ask him point blank, so what are you going to do to contribute to my program of sobriety?
It's going to be shocking, but
Of course, for
you might
most.
have to think about it a little
The
bit.
simple answer is, I'm going to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ to you unconditionally every time you walk in the door.
Mm-hmm.
And that there is no judgment here. There's only absolution. Yeah, but you don't know me. Don't need to know you because Jesus does.
The judgment was at the cross.
Correct. Exactly. That's all you need. That's all you need. You don't need a song and dance about the sacraments or how we worship here or our programs or our ministry. No.
I should clip this. This is the best part.
All I need to hear is, you're going to give me the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm going to get my sins forgiven. And I'm not going to be, and then all the other stuff, mentoring, Bible classes.
We could figure that out. I mean,
that's all. Yeah, that's all after the fact.
It's not super formal.
I just walked into your church for the first or second time. I don't even know the protocols, right? I just need to know, how are you going to contribute to my program of sobriety?
And maybe it would be helpful to know if there's others.
Because 100%
for that conversation. Yeah.
Within AA, at least, we're taught from the big book that you have to make sobriety the most important focus of every single day.
Wow.
Because there is no freedom outside of that. When you first hear it, you think to yourself, but if I'm only thinking about sobriety, how can I do anything else? Versus, no, sobriety is the fence line.
How are you going to do anything else if you're not sober?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's the dichotomy there. It's like, if all of my thinking and actions are dedicated to this one thing, I can't do anything else. It's like, no, actually everything else is contained inside that one thing. Same as Jesus.
Yeah. So here, that's what your book is putting. It's like, okay, there is something above sobriety, and it's Jesus. It's sobriety in Jesus.
Because only he can bring you to sobriety.
Right.
That's the point, is that if you're going to chase this impossible prize, which is either to find relief from your suffering inside your addiction, it's impossible. if you think you're going to actually find relief from your addiction within just sobriety, it's an impossible task as well. It's an
Well, then
impossible
it's no
prize.
surprise that we see, like you mentioned, some of the, well, we know celebrities more than other people, but
Sure.
that they maybe go through a program or they go through rehab,
Right.
then they end up in some kind of pious religious order. I
Sure.
mean, I'm thinking like Mel Gibson did that.
Yeah.
That was another one. He was a drunk, right?
Shia did it too.
Shia
Making the
did
Padre
it.
Pio movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and maybe it's not long standing. I hope it is, but
Russell Brand went through the same thing, and now they're all being called out for becoming Christians.
yeah, and the authenticity of it is always a question. I know that, but that
You're always seeing it from a distance.
we're seeing it from a distance. That's right. And so if somebody, whether they're notable or not, but that is, working their sobriety in your church, people are going to say, are they really safe? Are they really good to have that? I mean, they're going to make the same judgment as we do on the celebrities.
And the answer is, don't look at him, look at Christ.
But I think what you're saying is that they recognize that sobriety is
right.
It's more than me.
Right. Well, it's not. It's more than me. It's more than my sobriety group. Those are all part of it.
Right.
But that's the vocational side.
Those are the gifts.
Yeah, those are the gifts. Exactly. Those are the generalized. Those are the general grace. But I need a specific grace that's for you, for the forgiveness.
And that I think we need to reiterate that because we mentioned it a long time ago earlier in the episode. That God, Jesus in His grace gives sobriety to people even outside the church.
Right.
And we can be thankful for that too.
Right. But it's all intended to bring you to that specific grace of the Lord bless you and keep you.
They say, okay, I have relief. Is there even more?
Exactly.
Can this be even better?
That's the word. He daily and abundantly forgives my sins and the sins of all believers as we confess.
Yeah.
I need the flood language. I need abundance.
I want even more.
Right.
Even more.
Right. Exactly. And so, that's the simple answer is I need to go where there's an abundance of healing and an abundance of forgiving and an abundance of grace and mercy and an abundance of other people saying it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
We'll help you. Right.
Because
I have to get sober for myself. That's come on the prime tenets of this. I have to be sober for me, because I get sober for you and then you disappear or die or go away. Well, I have no reason to be sober anymore. Versus if I get sober for me, then I'm now free to actually serve others. Well, I can't have faith for my children.
Yeah.
So they can't be saved through me. I can tell them the good news. I can share that message with them.
But
I can
there's
tell
a
them
hypocrisy on it with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Versus my children will be saved through faith in Jesus Christ. And that is their relationship with him within the community of believers. But in with that community of saints, why are we all here in the first place? Well, it's not to talk to each other until we figure it out or talk each other into heaven. It's to come forward and say, for you, for you, for you, for you, for you.
We're starting to figure this out locally.
Many parts, one body.
Where the, and what you could get from the 12 step is to say, the first step is honesty.
Right.
But it's honesty with those, with other people like you.
Yeah.
Right. So we have a couples group now, and it'll take a while, I think, for people to open up. But I know that there are plenty of people there who, their marriages are not what they'd like them to be.
Right.
But they can't say that. I mean, myself included, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like a pastor's got to have his act together, right? Because he can't.
That would be the couple that has the least act togetherness.
Right. But but that openness that AA teaches, and like you said, people are looking for churches that are like AA.
Yeah.
But the vulnerability of all of this,
right?
Because you're getting. How did I say it in a sermon a week ago? Oh, because it was the sharp two-edged sword from Hebrews, right? And I said, God kind of like he cuts into you and lays you open,
right?
And exposes your nakedness to others.
He doesn't want to rehabilitate you. He wants to kill you.
No.
So he can give you new life.
Yeah.
I need a new heart, not a new heart valve.
Yeah. So I'm that level of vulnerability where you're laid bare naked before God.
Yeah, especially if you're new to it. It's how honest are you? How transparent are you within not only your vocation, husband, father, pastor, etc., but also in front of other people.
Just be uncomfortably honest. I think that's okay.
It depends, and you have to grow into it. I would say if I walked into
there needs to be trust. I suppose there's that as well.
If I walk into an AA meeting, I can talk about anything because most of these people are strangers. And therefore there's no fear of retribution or judgment because you don't know me. And then you're going to do the same.
And what are you going to do? Who are you going to tell?
Right.
Like what?
Versus when you're in front of other people that that's a different dynamic.
Yeah, this is true with like porn addiction and your spouse.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
may have to confess it to pastor
Right.
frequently
Well, you don't.
first.
It's to your point. I can admit to porn addiction in the same way I can admit it to like adultery.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to know the details. I understand how it works, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to go down a rabbit trail of, oh, by the way, I like this and I watch this and I did. No, I know that's all a part of this.
Right. Right.
I just need to know you have an addiction. Now, what are we going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
It's the same. Honestly, it's the same as if you came to me and said, I have diabetes. I'm like, okay, what are we going to do about it? Well, don't you want to know how I came up with that? No, I don't care. You have it. Let's deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. How can I help you?
Right.
How you got diabetes? Whatever. It's not important now.
We can't change it. Right.
You can't change it.
Yeah.
Likewise, you're an addict. You're being preyed upon by evil spirits. All right. Well, got to teach you to invoke the name of Jesus Christ and make the sign of the cross.
Mm-hmm.
I got to water you up again in baptism.
Here's a prayer.
And oh, by the way, since we're here, we might as well just take communion.
Mm-hmm.
Get that out of the way.
Right.
Because I think we started with this, we can end with this, which is that God doesn't leave us with spiritual abstractions. He says, here is a tree, here is a water, here is a body, here is bread. And he seems to really enjoy it, biblically speaking.
Yeah.
And we've retained that, thank God, in the church. And so, again, find the body, which is the church, body of Christ. And then within that body, find its members, the priest, people within your church that you can be honest with and intimate with in that sense of, sharing your experience, strength, and hope in addiction, in recovery, or living with that. And then seek out those places where you can find relief. In the Schmalkald articles, I actually referred to it when I was reading. I need the mutual consolation and comfort of other believers.
Right.
That's the fourth use of the gospel according to Luther.
Mm-hmm.
And sitting at the kitchen table, sitting in a car in a parking lot, having a cup of coffee, talking through it, wherever at church in a pew, wherever it may be.
That's not a formal prescription. It's a description of
It's like
Christians consoling
we've said,
each other.
It's fine to pray formally in church on Sunday. That's great. And if you want to pray formally at home, great. But sometimes you just have to say, help, Lord, help me. And that's the most profound prayer that has ever been uttered.
Or to your neighbor, right?
Yeah, exactly. Can you please pray for me? Pray with me. Because I can't. I don't have the words, whatever it might be. There's no shame in admitting that to Christ. He still holds his hands out and goes, yeah, I died for that too. And so, within the context of addiction, within the context of couples, within the context of parenting, within the couples of anything, the transparency has to be weighed against how far do I go before I hurt the relationship? And also within that,
and no secrets before God.
Right. And so ultimately I will go into my room and close the door because my Father who sees me in secret.
As if you could keep secrets from him anyway. But
and this goes back to my reference to the early monk. My best friend is God. And therefore, if I needed to really share the dark secrets and the secret names of things, I'm going to talk to him. And I'm not going to reveal that in front of people because it'll become performative. And I don't want it to be.
Potentially. Yeah, that's true too.
And so I'm just going to make the sign of the cross. I'm going to pray the Kyrie. I'm going to pray the Lord's Prayer. I'll pray the Jesus Prayer, whatever it might be, however you pray. And just lay it all out. And I like the fact that most churches, most pastors will leave the church open during the day so that if you want to come in and kneel at the altar and you're alone there, it's a hushed place and it's quiet and you can be contemplative and you can just lay it out for God in his house if that's where you want to do it at. But you can do it in your bathroom. You can do it next to your bed on your knees. You can do it laying on your face in the dirt, whatever. Doesn't matter. He doesn't stand on
in the toilet. Oh, you said in the bathroom. Okay.
In the bathroom, on the toilet if you need. That's like we talk about. If you want me to baptize you in a gas station bathroom, I'll do it. I just need some water, right? If you want to baptize at the river, I'll do it there. If you want to baptize at the pond, I'll do it
here's
there.
Water. What's to prevent me from being baptized?
Exactly. It's the same thing with addiction.
Yeah.
Is, oh, you're a drunk. So now what are we going to do? Oh, you have a porn addiction. Okay, what are we going to do now? Right. And this is the funny thing is, funny, not haha, but funny thing is the one place that we can receive relief and strength to fight the addiction is the one place we run away from because we think and we say, and others tell us, you're an addict, man. You don't have any business being up there receiving the body and blood of Christ. It's like, it's in the post-communion collect, faith in you and fervent love toward one another.
Right.
So where are you? It's like saying, I really want to be strong, but I don't want to go to the gym and lift weights.
You're going to lift something.
You got to go somewhere and lift something.
Or
The
go
gym's
for
just
a walk, or
you just know that when you go to the gym, there's weights there that you can lift. Likewise, if you want grace and forgiveness, you go to where the grace and forgiveness is actually there, which would
promise.
be God's house.
Yeah.
And if you have a priest or a pastor that doesn't give it to you, leave, because
Yeah.
he's not doing his job.
Yeah, that's non-negotiable.
Yeah, it's non-negotiable. Not only is he not helping with your sobriety, he's damaging your salvation. Don't do that. There's enough problems. Again, everyone's suffering. Everyone's insecure. You're not unique. It's just that with addiction, and it's turned all the way up to 11 now, and it's on blast. And then all these spiritual influences are just screaming at you day in and day out. You're unworthy. You don't deserve this. You're a piece of garbage. If they only knew, these kinds of things. That's all demonic. That's not Christ.
Right.
Again, as Paul says in Corinthians, Jesus is God's yes to the world's no. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, I agree.
So go to him. And yeah, you might have to kiss a few toads before you find an actual prince. You might have to go to a couple churches before someone answers the question with the gospel. But
we watched The Princess and the Frog, my daughter and I. I'd never seen it.
Which one?
The newer one?
Okay.
Where they both become frogs?
Oh, nice.
Or she becomes a frog. So they're both frogs. And they get married as frogs.
Perfect.
That's perfect. And then, of course, now she's a princess.
Shrek?
It's kind of it's kind of like Shrek. Okay.
Where it turns out Fiona's actually
Psalm 147. It's our psalm for the week here.
Okay.
The Lord takes pleasure in those who fear him, and those who hope in his mercy. Yeah. And then speaking of Jerusalem, he has strengthened the bars of your gates. He's blessed your children within you. He makes peace in your borders. And I love this line. And he fills you with the finest wheat.
There you go.
So that's what
except people with celiac disease.
The finest wheat, not the celiac kind. The fat of the wheat, literally.
There we go. The good wheat.
Not
fatty,
the GMO. The fatty wheat. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Fatty wheat. I like that.
That's the Hebrew. I don't know.
That should be some breakfast cereal. Fatty wheat. It's good for the whole family.
Good.
Cool. Anything else?
No.
Well, I like it. Good. Hope that was enjoyable. If you want me to read from the book some more, we can do that. Just email, text, let us know.
It's kind of Inception, but the author reading the book. Are you going to read the audiobook too?
No, I'll probably
Who's doing the audiobook? It's listed on the website.
Is it?
Yeah. So maybe
I
they
know
already have
Killian's reading Withertongue emails, but I don't know about this one.
Okay.
Is there an audiobook for this one?
They don't have it available for pre-order, but they have a link for it. So
oh, nice. I have no idea. I'll have to ask Steve.
Okay.
Then we'll both know.
Okay.
But very cool. All righty then. Thanks everybody. Thanks 1517 for the format, the platform, and everything else. Go over to the website for all the goodies. You can buy my books. You can buy Chad Bird's books, of course, since he's listed with me.
Yes.
Always.
Contributor.
A fine boy, that young Chad Bird. A good writer. He's got promise, I think. But
nice forward.
Yeah, we got some good folks writing at 1517 in podcasting. So go check that out.
Yeah.
And I did an interview with Kelsey, our friend Kelsey.
It's linked in the show notes.
So you go check out her podcast. She has good guests on there week to week.
Outside Ourselves, yeah.
Outside Ourselves. Thank you. I always forget the name of it. Outside Ourselves.
It's a nice
sounds like a
name.
Pixar movie.
It's a Lutheran name.
It is. That's true.
That's Inside.
Yeah. Outside, inside the Lutheran Pixar. But yeah, and thank you to all of you, obviously, because this wouldn't be possible, and we would be doing this without you. But it's nice to have listeners rather than us just talking to each other in silence.
At least for our egos.
That's fair. That is fair. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there we go. Talk to you again real soon. God bless you. Peace. Fiend.
Okay.